Okay, transcription has started and the recording has started. Good morning, everyone. It is 9:03 on Friday, March 24th, 2023, and I'm calling this meeting of the Working Group on the Status of Libraries in Vermont to order. My name is Catherine Delnau. I'm the State Librarian and Commissioner of the Department of Libraries and the Chair of the Working Group on the Status of Libraries in Vermont. Today, the Working Group is going to focus its attention on two topics: emergency preparedness and social services in libraries. And we're going to get started with a roll call. So we'll just go alphabetically. Meg Allison.
Hi, I'm here. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Maria Avery is going to join us at 10 o'clock. So she's not here yet.
Nope, I'm here.
Oh, you're here.
I am.
Oh.
It might be Denise that needs to come in late. I'm not sure, but I am here. Good morning.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria. And sorry, there are a lot of moving pieces with this meeting, and I probably put the note in the wrong spot. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, of course.
Jeanette Baer. I see Jeanette.
I think she just got on.
Okay. Christopher Kaufman-Ilstrup, we just saw you. And Denise, we just heard from you. Andy Kolovos. Is Andy here? Maybe not yet. Oh, I see Jeanette. Good morning. Kelly McCagg.
I am here. I have to take an early break at 11, but then I'll be back.
Wonderful. I have that note. Thanks for letting me know. Karen McCullough is going to join us around 9:45. Susan O'Connell.
I am here.
Great. And Wendy Sharkey.
I'm here.
Wonderful. We also have a number of staff from the Department of Libraries who are joining us for this meeting. Jeanette Schaefer.
Good morning.
Tom McMurdo.
Good morning, everyone.
Gina Rubin, who is valiantly here, even though she's ill right now, and will be doing the minutes, but perhaps not all in one go. She might be leaving during the day and doing minutes based on the video. Hi, Gina.
Hi, everybody. Thank you.
And I want to say I did not ask Gina to be here. In fact, I counseled her not to be here. So she is being a superhero all on her own. Josh Muse, who's here in the next room in case anybody needs technology support at the department.
Good morning, all.
April Shaw.
Good morning.
Hey, April. Lauren Kelly.
Good morning.
Good morning. Karen Gravlin.
Good morning.
Hello. Joy Warland.
Good morning, everybody.
Hey, Joy. Jonathan Clark.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. And then I think Lily Talbert may be here as well.
Good morning.
Good morning. Okay, and we have a couple of our presenters who have joined us a few minutes early. So I think Ben Rose is here, and also we saw that Matthew Bolerman is here. Is there anyone else present who hasn't said good morning yet?
Hi, this is Denise. I'm late, but I'm here. Sorry about that.
Oh, great. Super. You're not very late. You're pretty close to just on time. Okay, so now that we've done with roll call, we will move on to the next topic. So we have a really full agenda today, and we have, I think, 11 people joining the working group to share presentations or provide comments on these topics and to answer questions that the working group has for them. We had a little bit of a slow start to gathering written testimony and gathering presenters for today. And then we had this huge flurry happen after we had already posted the agenda. So because it's a public body, we post the agenda 48 hours in advance. You'll notice if you go to the working group's website that there's the agenda that we initially pushed out, and then there's the revised agenda, which for those of you in the working group who saw the meeting invite that I sent out, you'll notice that those two agendas don't exactly match. It's because I was fitting in some last minute guests. I put a link to the changes that I'm proposing that we make to today's agenda just to fit everybody in. So if the working group is agreeable to these changes, that would be wonderful, because then we don't have to revise the agenda again. Everybody will come at the right points. Do people feel pretty comfortable with just going along with the recently revised agenda? Okay, so I think I just need a motion and a second to make that change.
This is Kelly. I'll make a motion to accept the revised agenda.
Thank you, Kelly. Can I get a second?
This is Andy. I'll second.
Wonderful. And I will mark you as present, Andy. So we're going to do a quick vote by members of the working group, just a yay or nay. All in favor of making the changes to the agenda per the document that I just put a link to in the chat, please say aye.
Aye.
And all opposed, please say nay. Okay, we're going to move forward with the revised agenda that's in the chat. This is also available on the working group's webpage under changes to the agenda. It's just a document that we posted yesterday, because we had some really great folks able to join us at the last minute to share with us. So I'm going to move into the next topic, which is the approval of the minutes of the January 27, 2023 meeting. Many thanks to Gina, the executive assistant here in the Department of Libraries. Gina Rubin took the minutes and made them available really quickly, which is, of course, in keeping with public meeting law requirements. And I'm wondering, working group members, does anyone have comments on the minutes or see areas that require revision? And I see Kelly's hand is up.
For the approval of the minutes, mine and Karen's name got squished together. I think I was the one that seconded it, but it has Karen's last name instead of mine.
Oh gosh.
Was an easy mistake to make. And then on page 3, it's towards the bottom of the page, and it says Christopher Kaufman, and then it says is. I think it's supposed to be if. And those were the only two things I saw.
What page was that on, Kelly?
Page 3, it's towards the bottom.
Okay, let me just, yes, I see the if. I also think we should add page numbers now that I'm looking at them, because that would get hard to make edits. So on page 3, changing the if, and then with the approval of the minutes, Kelly McCagg, not McCullough, on page 1. Okay, thank you for noticing those. Thanks for reading them in advance. That is great, and for noticing those needs to change. Any other revisions or comments on the minutes? Okay. So does anyone want to move to accept the minutes with those revisions?
This is Mike Allison. I'll move to make a motion to accept the minutes from our January working group meeting.
Okay, do we hear a second from anyone?
This is Kelly. I'll second them.
Okay, so all in favor of approving the minutes with those with the revision on page 1 and the revision on page 3, please say aye.
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 All opposed, please say nay. Okay, the minutes of the Friday, January 27th, 2023 meeting of the working group are approved with those 2 revisions. We are just moving right along. It is a little bit early to move to number 3, but let's want to open it up for public comment. Are there any members of the public present who would like to provide comment? Hearing none, and for guests, we frequently have no other attendees from the public. So if we do see someone come later on, we could always open it up for them to share something. But if Ben Rose is ready to begin, we could start with Ben Rose's presentation. Ben is the Recovery and Mitigation Section Chief from the Vermont Emergency Management Department.
Division. Yes, hello. Good morning, Catherine and everyone, esteemed librarians. I am a member of the public, so I can keep you on schedule by just using the extra time provided. And I have a lot to share, and I hope it'll engender some questions and conversation. And I think we can go as much or as little into the weeds as necessary. I have an email that I've drafted which I'll send to Catherine right after this, and you can put links in the chat or whatever is most helpful. But I think what I'm going to do as an agenda is share my screen, and you can just all walk through that email with me, and we can open some of the links together.
Absolutely.
Tell me when you can.
Yeah,
We're
seeing it now. Yeah, and I'm going to turn my camera off just so that I'm not a distraction.
Okay, yeah. So I'll just assume that what people are seeing is this email that I haven't sent to Catherine yet. Okay. And so here we go. Hi, Catherine. I blocked out time yesterday to work on a PowerPoint, but my day got overwhelmed by other matters, emergency management, and so forth. So this will be my attempt to put together links and resources that may be helpful for libraries. And first, here's my member of the public comment. My wife and I live and raised our kids in Williston Village, and our son and daughter always walk to the Williston Central School for K-8, which is just a few hundred yards in the village. And for several of those years, there was a gap between when school ended and when Laura and I could get home from work. So our kids spent those hours at the Dorothy Alling Memorial Library many, many, many days. And they knew that the library was a place to be quiet and to read and to do their homework and to explore. And it served them very, very well. And it's part of the fabric of Williston Village. And it's one of the many reasons why I never mind paying our taxes. So I reviewed your committee's charge, and I'm overwhelmed. I mean, you have a huge assignment. You have a tremendous amount to do. I've always personally been sort of in awe of librarians and what they do. And I just think you have a very formidable amount of stuff to deal with. And thank you for what you do. I personally am rooting for you. So with that said, you actually might have asked the wrong person at the Vermont Division of Emergency Management if what you really want is preparedness, which is all about developing plans and exercising them and so forth. I can cover and point you in the right direction, but I want to start with just Emergency Management 101, which is that there are different distinct phases of the discipline of emergency management. There's preparedness, which is what you do on blue sky days. There's response, which is what we usually think of when we talk about emergency management. It's people in vests and helmets and fire trucks dealing with dangerous situations and adrenaline. And it happens fast. It's a sprint to effectuate life safety activities. That's response. Then there's recovery, whereas response is a sprint, recovery is a marathon. We're still closing out Tropical Storm Irene. My team is just grinding on cost recovery, dealing with FEMA for years and years after a flood or an ice storm. And a recovery can last for decades. Think about the recovery that we're going to be dealing with as a society from COVID-19. And then there's mitigation, and mitigation is sort of the golden box in this, because mitigation is the activities that you undertake, again, on blue sky days to address known hazards. It's the things you do that bend the curve of your vulnerability to the next disaster. So when you buy out a flood-prone structure and replace it with a structure that's built in a less flood-prone place, you're mitigating future risk. You're buying down societal risk. And that's why the federal government makes money available for hazard mitigation, is because the cost-benefit analysis says that it's cheaper for the taxpayers to move a structure or elevate a structure or provide flood proofing for a structure in advance. It's the old an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So I'm the recovery and mitigation section chief. So I deal with the ultramarathons, I deal with the cost recovery. I'm the recovery unit leader for $500 million of COVID funding for just for the COVID incident. It's the biggest incident we've ever had. So with all of that said, I've got a lot of resources to share. Some of them are not really in my wheelhouse, but I'm going to point you to where you can find the resources for libraries. And I think you probably all know more than I do about what you need to prepare for in terms of your plans, whether it's infrastructure and making sure that you flip the breaker before you leave before a flood, or heaven forbid, your preparedness for active shooter scenarios. There's all kinds of preparedness that you can do, and there's an infinite number of things we all can worry about. And I would not presume to tell you what preparedness work is most appropriate to your situations. You know that. I can point you to resources. And so what I want to do is just scroll through. Again, I'm reminded that you're looking at this screen. So here are some resources. And I've got a list here. Let me just scroll to the bottom so you see what we're up against. I'm going to get into the nitty gritty of Vermont emergency management preparedness resources at the end. But so I want to talk you through each of the topics that I've boldfaced here. And can someone just nod or grunt or say something, because I can't see you at all, which is disconcerting. But am you tracking?
Yeah, we're seeing it. I can stay on camera too, so that you can.
That'd be helpful. Just give me a human to talk to here.
Yeah, and other folks, if you want to, if others are comfortable being on camera, you're welcome to do that. Especially since Ben appreciates that. He seems like he's like me. I'd usually rather see the faces of the people I'm talking to.
I want to show you the links, but I also want to see some humans. All right. Well, anyway, so the first thing I wanted to say, the first one is about Irene. I've mentioned Irene, and I was the last of the 4 Irene recovery officers. And I was actually hired by Sue Minter, who was the second Irene recovery officer after Neil Lunderville. And I sort of ended up holding the bag at the end. But at the 2-year anniversary of Irene, we put together a report, which we wanted to make available for the future, even for future generations, if I may say so, as a book that would tell the story of Irene. And a picture is worth 1,000 words. And so this is a document that we put together that I was sort of hoping would end up in each library, which tells the story of Irene. And I just want to scroll through it because I want librarians to be aware of this storybook. I'm just whipping through it because it's a good actually conversation starter to talk about disaster preparedness. We are now, as a state, much better prepared for the next Irene. And of course, the next thing will not be Irene. It'll be something completely different that we didn't see coming, like a pandemic. I just want to get to the last section. What we have learned. And the state did well as a whole, in part because we have resilient communities, and I think FEMA was impressed with how the state of Vermont rallied as a collection of communities to come out of it honestly stronger than we went into it. All right, that's recovery. Now I got to figure out how to close that. And this was just something that I wanted to show you for show and tell. When I talked about emergency management, this is the Vermont Division of Emergency Management, and here's how we're structured. Our director is Erica Borneman, who is the outgoing president of the National Emergency Managers Association. So she's had a great bully pulpit with FEMA. We have four sections. I'm recovery and mitigation section chief here. There's preparedness, planning and preparedness, which is currently has a lot of vacancies right now. There's engagement, which is public outreach, and there's operations and logistics, which are the folks you typically think of. Anyway, that was just on my screen. Let me go back to my email and go to the next thing. Gotta find it again. I seem to have outsmarted myself for a minute. Here we go. Okay. The big ticket item that I think I have for you, and the reason I think you probably asked me here was because of hazard mitigation funding opportunities. And so what I want to do is take you into the Vermont Emergency Management website. And again, you'll have all this sent to you, and you can explore the ones that are of interest. And I would just want to start by noting, when we deal with FEMA, I apologize in advance. It is a terrific bureaucratic thing, and many people who get hazard mitigation projects done through federal funding come out of it both safer and more embittered. It's a long and complicated process, but it's very slow. So all right, here we go into the website. Drag it over to the screen you're seeing. Yeah. And we have different flavors of hazard mitigation funding available. And there are examples of successful projects. Again, if you like pictures, I think I can open this and then close it again. That's a trailer that was bought out after Irene. That's a place in Barrie where now it floods less. That's a place in downtown Brandon where now it floods less. That's a place in Jeffersonville where now the river has access to its floodplain and it floods less. The place in East Middlebury where now it floods less. It's a road that has been rebuilt. Anyway, right now we have an interesting opportunity because of the confluence of COVID-19 and the climate action planning work in the state, we have more money for hazard mitigation than we've ever had before. We have both federal money and state money, and I'm not going to get in the weeds of the different grant programs. You can explore them on the website, but to cut to the chase, for those of you who are worried that your facilities are located in flood-prone places, talk to us. We will work with you to develop a project. We'll see if we can get a cost-benefit analysis that is positive so that it's FEMA competitive. We'll help you develop an application. We'll help you get funding to get an engineer to study the best solution if you're not at project readiness yet. We can do it if you tell us what your worry is about flooding for your facility, especially if you have a history of flooding in the past that builds the denominator for cost-benefit analysis. So on this link, I should open it again. Sorry, I know this is a little choppy. if you go to this page, or just go to Vermont Emergency Management and put in the search box hazard mitigation, it will refer you to Stephanie A. Smith, who is our state hazard mitigation officer. Stephanie and her team are wonderful. They're customer service oriented. We would love to work with libraries to do hazard mitigation projects. And I mentioned that there's state money. We got a chunk of ARPA funding from the state to establish the Flood Resilient Communities Fund, which is may not be there forever, but this program has about $7 million left. And it's state money, which means we can do things faster than FEMA does them, and we can do things that FEMA can't or won't do for various FEMA reasons. And so the Flood Resilient Communities Fund makes us really poised to do projects that bend the curve of flood resilient for communities and their infrastructure, including libraries. That's a mouthful. Let me just stop if there are any questions on that one, because that's important. Anybody want to chime in? Does that make sense?
It does. Thanks, Ben. This is Meg Allison. I'm curious. I'm from Moortown, and where we were heavily impacted by Irene. Our library, our public library, became a hub. The school library was gutted. I was the school librarian here at the time. And I remember FEMA coming in, and as a community member of Moortown, they came in 2 weeks later, and they were so impressed by all the work that had already been done.
Yeah.
And, so I appreciate that flashback, because it was, quite a testimony to Vermont's resiliency and our community collectivity for the greater good of our neighbors. I'm curious to know if, what about flooding insurance and whether that's provided for libraries?
Not by the state, hopefully by whoever owns the library, whether it's the community or no. I mean, one of the requirements of getting FEMA funding is that you're required to maintain flood insurance going forward if it's commercially available for any structure. And that's the federal government not wanting to pay for the same thing twice. It makes sense. It's like, we've got you the first time. After that, if there's a product you can buy to buy your own risk, you must do so.
Great, I appreciate that. I'm just wondering if maybe a question for some libraries that may not have it is, if it's cost prohibitive, for those buildings. I know certainly for private homeowners it is.
Yeah, there's really two scenarios. One is you're not in the FEMA mapped special flood hazard area, which means your flood risk is deemed to be fairly low, which means that flood insurance should be more affordable. In which case, if you have any flood risk, you should buy it. The other scenario is you're in a special flood hazard area, which means that it's too expensive to even buy flood insurance. If you're in that place, you should move or do something to harden against the anticipated flood levels that you might face. That's telling you something if you can't afford flood insurance about your flood risk.
I see a hand from Christopher Kaufman-Ilstrup.
Hey, Ben, it's good to see you.
Hi, Christopher.
Thanks for joining us. I think this is really just to kind of get it on the record for the minutes. But also I wonder if maybe you might not know about this opportunity. I just learned about it relatively recently. But in addition to the support that's available for disaster mitigation from FEMA, I learned that recently that the National Endowment for the Humanities and the National Endowment for the Arts both have emergency funding available for widespread disasters in states that can be applied for by the state arts councils or state arts agencies and the state humanities councils. So just as a note for you to add to the list of options. I don't think we knew about that during Irene. It may not have existed then, but it does now.
It didn't exist during Irene. It exists because of COVID. Thank you. And that actually that's a perfect segue, Christopher, to my next resource, which is the Vermont Arts and Culture Disaster and Resilience Network, VACDARN, if you like acronyms, which we do in emergency management. So the Vermont Arts and Culture Disaster and Resilience Network is something that was set up, I think in 2019. Rachel Onoff is sort of our matriarch, and I'm going to copy her here. And I was hoping that she would chime in with precisely the types of resources that Christopher was just referencing. For example, National Endowment for the Arts, the Agency of Commerce and Community Development has some grant programs that are potentially available. And I'm assuming that you all have visibility on some of this through the Arts Council and so forth. But I think the VACDARN website, which I'll open here, is a pretty good starting place to find some of those resources. It's opening.
And Ben, Rachel's our next presenter, so I think she'll
Oh.
be covering some of those.
Fabulous. Okay, good.
Yeah.
I'm off the hook. All right, great. I had missed that. Yeah, Rachel is fabulous, and she is a connector for a lot of these resources. And I mean, essentially, we're trying to welcome libraries into the fold of the VACDARN impulse, which is to connect community and cultural resource providers with emergency management resources. So that's, I think VACDARN is where the conversation is happening and where the resources are being collected. So the next one, and stop me if you're already way ahead and all over this, but it's fairly new and it comes out of COVID, and it's an appropriation that the state made of the federal ARPA dollars, again, American Rescue Plan Act, $1 billion+ for the state of Vermont to spend. And funding was provided to the BGS, Buildings and General Services, to make municipal energy resilient grants. And they just released the first notice of funding opportunity. And I know that I guess libraries come in different flavors. Some are municipal and some are quasi-municipal and some are public nonprofits. So I can't speak to the specific eligibility of different facilities, but I want to encourage you to check out this program. For starters, every community gets, I think, $4,000 to do an assessment. And I know just in Williston, we have a citizens group called the Sustainable Williston. And one of our first projects, I want to say 10 years ago, was to do an energy audit of the library. And it led to tightening the envelope of the Dorothy Alling Library, which saves the town money and is a good thing. And I think the opportunity to identify those types of projects is great right now. And there are going to be implementation grants. This is sort of new to Buildings and General Services, but if you are a municipal thing or have access to it through the town, this is a really cool program, and I'm excited to see where it goes. I see a question.
Oh, it's just a hand. Having been on ARPA tour with Commissioner Finch, I just wanted to share that my understanding is that these MERP grants are available to the municipalities. So a municipal library through their municipality could apply for one of the MERP Municipal Energy Resilience Program grants. My understanding is that the incorporated libraries could not access those, cannot access those funds. But definitely, if you have questions about this, reach out to BGS, Buildings and General Services, and they can help folks with that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Catherine, have you already covered the local ARPA funding and the fact that municipalities received these big chunks of funding to use to allocate by the end of 2024?
We haven't talked very much about that in our working group. This is the first meeting that we're really talking about emergency planning and emergency response.
Okay, and this sort of spills over into capital planning and infrastructure work and so forth. But suffice it to say that municipalities have this unique generational opportunity right now to make transformational investments because of the ARPA funding. And it was, hundreds of thousands of dollars to each small Vermont community. And that has set up some interesting conversations in local communities about what are the priorities and how should that one-time opportunity be allocated. And if a library, however it's structured and owned, is integral to a community, it's a good time to sort of make that case to select boards and voters, that we have a need here, and I won't get into it deeper than that, but it's there, and it's a conversation to be had at the local level. The next thing I wanted to mention, which I hope Rachel will touch on as well, is that one of our functions of emergency management is to develop contingency contracts for the really, really bad things that might happen. So, for example, we were working before COVID hit on an RFP for a contingency disaster contractor. There's big firms who go around and chase disasters and hurricanes and tornadoes around the country. You want to line one up before the disaster hits, because all of a sudden then they're in great demand. And so it's best practice to have contingency contracts. And so we procured a contractor called Guidehouse within weeks after COVID was declared, and they have served us very, very well in maximizing our use of ARPA dollars and mixing and matching federal grants. There were 108 different federal agencies trying to push money out to help with COVID-19, and just air traffic control has been overwhelming for small states and big states. And Guidehouse has helped. And so, for example, the state of Vermont has pulled in over $500 million of FEMA funding for eligible COVID-19 activities, because we identified from day one that the FEMA funding was more restrictive than the ARPA funding. And so the more FEMA dollars we got, the more ARPA dollars that would free up for other societal needs. And not every state did that. Not every state had that integration and coordination. We're small, and so we've just crushed it on FEMA funding, thanks to Guidehouse. So that's one contingency contract. We have those in place for debris management and for debris monitoring, which is a separate thing, in the event of a catastrophic debris event, whether it's a tornado or a hurricane, heaven forbid, that rips up the Connecticut Valley or the Champlain Valley, was it 1937 or 1938 was the last one that would really meet that scenario. Debris, Irene was not a huge debris event, but I think it was a 38 hurricane was, or heaven forbid, a big explosion would generate debris that would overwhelm our municipal and state resources. So we have contracts in place with firms that are no cost contracts, but those contractors have signed that they will show up if we need them, heaven forbid. And the last one is pretty cool, I think, which is, and Rachel was on point for this, which is a document recovery contingency contract with Polygon US Corporation. And I don't really understand who they are or what they do, but I understand that they're in the wings if we have a situation where documents get soaked and need to be saved and so forth, and task orders can be executed under this contingency contract with Polygon to move very quickly to try to do document recovery. And I've already told you more than I really know about it, but it's there. Okay, then now I'm getting into, I guess, what I would call preparedness. Number one, your libraries are important community infrastructure. They should be identified, recognized, and thought about in local emergency management plans. Every community is supposed to have a local emergency management plan, and close to 90% of Vermont's communities do, which is actually pretty good, because there are a few communities that really have no humans. Glastonbury doesn't have one, but that's okay. Anyway, every librarian, I'm saying, should know who is your local emergency management director. That should be on the town's website. If it's not, ask the town clerk. If she doesn't know, ask the select board. Somebody in town, whether it's the chair of the select board or the road foreman or a super volunteer, is tagged as the EMD in your local community's local emergency management plan. That emergency management plan should talk about, here's what we're going to do. Here are the contact people. Here's who needs to be notified. Here's who does what. It's a short document, but a very important document. It should have up-to-date contacts. The library should be integrated into that plan. I'm not going to get into broadband. This is sort of out of order. I know broadband is huge. I suspect you all know a lot more about it than I do, and you know where to find the resources that are available right now. Again, for what is a generational opportunity because of ARPA funding and other federal initiatives right now. I know how important libraries were to providing broadband during the pandemic, and I'm not going to get into details there. So now, emergency preparedness. Basically, what I want to do is just bring you to the Vermont Emergency Management website, and you're going to find there all sorts of resources related to school safety. Here, I'll open up our website. Let's go to municipalities. It's kind of awkwardly organized, but let's just put in preparedness. And there you have it. And it's a lot. I know. But some of their cybersecurity things, and there are grants for that. There are school safety things, and I think there are some aspects of what libraries need to think about that are comparable to what schools have to think about. I mean, anybody can walk in the front door at any time, and I pulled out from our most recent newsletter. We have a newsletter that's on the website. I have the link here, and again, I'll send it. But it contains things like these. There are nonprofit security grants. If you have a specific concern, look at the eligibility criteria here. There are application assistance workshops coming up online, and the list of them is there. If you have a question about it, there's an inbox, and I have colleagues in Homeland Security Division who can help you with these grants. Catherine.
I'm just realizing, Ben, there's so much great information that you're sharing with us, and we also are about to get to the end of our time with you. So I wonder.
Yep, I'm on my last one.
Okay, a quick question before you get to that. We have a possibility right now. In emergency preparedness, it's kind of folded in the topic of safety and public facilities. But I'm wondering if we needed somebody to come and speak to that topic specifically in the future.
To what? I'm sorry.
If we wanted to invite somebody from DEM to come and speak specifically to kind of like public building safety planning, things like the schools have, who would that be? Who should we reach out to for that?
Well, I mean, do you think that the analog to schools is apt?
Somewhat, yeah. I mean, it's not a locked down center, but it's definitely, we definitely serve everyone, and there are a lot of potential overlaps there with schools with how we should be planning.
Yeah, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to send you contacts for the school safety program.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you.
Let me not do that on the fly right now, so I don't give you the wrong name. I'll send you a follow-up email. I'm going to go ahead and send this one now, Catherine, just so you just have access to it sooner rather than later. And
Okay,
I
great.
apologize for the helter-skelter nature of it. I know that's a lot and a little disorganized, but
No,
it's all there.
This is great, and I really appreciate it. I wonder, we have just a couple of minutes for folks to ask questions of Ben for working group members. Are there any questions that working group participants have for Ben right now? One thing to mention too, when we're thinking about you were mentioning that there's some planning, there's some sort of advanced planning contingency resources that the state has. We do also have libraries can participate in the Massachusetts Higher Education Consortium purchasing program, and Assistant State Librarian Tom McMurdo is going to share some information with the working group. Maybe by the time that we do our working group discussion later, he can just summarize for us a couple of those resources, because we also have the ability to do some consortial rate purchasing through MEH. No,
Great. Yeah,
MHEC.
Tom is a great co-founding board or member of VACDARN. And,
yeah.
Between Tom and Rachel, I think you have some great resources. I have one quick question. What has been missing? I mean, what have I not said that you were hoping I would talk about?
I think you actually, I want to make sure you know that you are the right person, because we were hoping you could talk about Irene and sort of what happened during that, and sharing that resource with us is just really wonderful. The book that you created, because the working group members can take a closer look at that. And the overview that you've given us, kind of what's available now, because COVID response is also in our charge to look at.
Mhm.
Like you said, everything's kind of in our charge. And working group members will hear a little bit later about public safety, how that might be getting added to our charge. So leading us to who to talk with about that would be that's really important as well. So you've sort of framed it for us.
Good.
Giving us a lot of information and state resources. And I think it's possible we might ask you and other folks from DEM to come back for future meetings. But Ben, you have done in your brief email at your presentation, you've given us such rich resources. So we really appreciate.
Okay. Well, please invite
today.
me back and
Okay.
And let me know what's missing or what the unmet needs are, and we will do everything we can to support your efforts.
And we can also sometimes it can be a little bit, as we're just sort of receiving the flood of information from a presenter, the group might be a little bit quiet, but they might, if working group members look at some of these resources and have follow-up questions for Ben, you can funnel those through me, and I'll reach out to him, and we can get more information that we can share responses to specific
Great.
questions.
Well,
to inform
let me get out of the
group.
way and make room for Rachel, because she's one of my heroines. So
wonderful. Well, we are really appreciative, Ben. Thanks for being here today, and welcome, Rachel. It's nice to meet you.
Hello, Catherine. Yeah, great to meet you. And Ben, good to see you. I hope you're feeling better.
And Rachel is here from the Vermont State Archives and Records Administration, but as Ben was sharing, she's also she's also a key leader in VACDARN, which is hard to even say for me. So I want to turn it over to Rachel. And Rachel, I don't know if you'd like us to stay on camera or go off camera, but welcome to, happy to do either one based on your preferences.
Oh, whatever you want to do. Whatever you
you're also welcome to share if you have anything that you wanted to do, share screen with.
Well, I will. I don't have the fire hose of links that Ben did, but I can certainly follow up with a few. But no, Tom told me I could talk, and Gina said I could talk extemporaneously, so I took them at their word, and I just have some written notes. But I'd be happy to share some links as a follow-up that could be shared more widely. So I first want to thank you, Catherine, and Tom, and Gina, and everyone at Libraries for the opportunity to speak on this topic to the working group. I really commend what you're doing more broadly with this group, and appreciate that emergency preparedness is one of the topics that you are hearing about. I hope from librarians as well as from us up at the state. And I was asked to talk about what resources are available both to plan for emergencies and best practices related to library collections and spaces. And I'll try to cover both of those and not be too repetitive of what Ben might have said. But first, I want to acknowledge just how challenging it is for public librarians, well, for all of us, but also in particular, public librarians to keep emergency preparedness top of mind. It's really a matter of developing a preparedness mindset, and it's something that once you embrace it, it really ought to be part of you for the rest of your life, or at least your professional career. It's not something where you can just check off that you've done something and put it on the shelf and you're good to go. So part of the challenge of it is it's kind of a low priority most of the time because there's not an emergency happening, but you have to be ready for it. And that idea of readiness is something that I try to work with organizations and the people at them to be ready. So some of the things we have for that are listed on the VACDARN website, which really is kind of our stepping off point for resources. But in addition to, a string of links on a website, I also want to emphasize that there are people, real people, who are ready to help you with preparedness and recovery as that needs to happen. The VACDARN Steering Committee is a terrific group and represents folks from a number of different sectors. Tom McMurdo represents libraries. We also have conservators and others who have experience responding to disasters. We also have people who are active nationally and internationally in emergency preparedness and response efforts, who just happen to live in Vermont. We're very fortunate in that. So some of the things that we have, in addition to these people who are available to help with questions and support and trainings and guidance, we do have some ideas on our website for what you might do, including resources for conducting a risk assessment. And I'm sure that Ben, who is a tremendous resource as well, I came in a little late to his presentation. I imagine he mentioned that the state is in the process of updating the state hazard mitigation plan. And that's a great resource. The last one was done in 2018, and they're charged with reviewing that every 5 years. And one of the things that if you look at the one that's on the website now, you'll see pandemic is a very low probability. I'm imagining that'll change some too. And just, I also want to drop in here somewhere that one thing in talking to Ben years ago, I asked him what keeps him up at night, and he said mass climate migration. And I feel like we've seen some of that, and it's also now there's this I'm thinking of the immigrants being dropped off at the Welcome Center in St. Johnsbury, and it's only a matter of time probably before people are going to be appearing at public libraries needing basically everything. So that's kind of another level of emergency response, and how do you prepare for that eventuality? I tend, because I'm from a collections background, to focus on natural disasters, largely water-based ones, and what they might do to your stuff. So that's another thing that we can try to plan for, and that's often done through a disaster plan. And we also have a lot of information on our website for how to create disaster plans and provide a template for a really basic one, and also a template that's is specific for Vermont organizations, and then a very light version that's specific for public libraries. It's basically a double-sided sheet that the idea is you carry it in your wallet, and it has the numbers you'll need immediately when something happens, and then the steps of what you should do in case you freeze and are not sure how to do what you need to do to get things moving. So those are some of the things that we've provided on the site. We also encourage you to build relationships with your local emergency managers, and this is something Ben did speak to. And I cannot echo him loudly enough that makes such a difference for them to know you, to know your repository, to know your floor plan, to know where things are that you care about. And in many public libraries, your general collections, they're not going to be a real high priority, but you may have special collections materials, you may have art on the walls. Your administrative files might be the most important materials. It's really good for them to know where all of that is. So those are kind of the three parts of readiness that we provide resources for. And then we're available for training on all of that as well. We developed at the Vermont Historical Records Program, where I'm based, my colleague created a module for self-paced study for emergency preparedness, and that's available on our website. Again, there's a link to it from VACDARN. And we also did, at Joy's request, did a couple webinars on basic emergency preparedness for public libraries, and then a slightly more advanced one. And those recordings are also available. So if kind of listening to someone talk about it is an easier way, that's an opportunity. There's also, and I invite you all, my job is to provide technical assistance and support and to build statewide capacity. So do not hesitate to reach out if you think I could be of use in terms of developing new training. I did some last year for the State Library of Iowa. They had a day-long emergency preparedness summit. That was the focus, the theme for them last year. So I did a series of, in addition to that, I did a webinar for members of library boards to talk to boards about how they could be engaged with emergency preparedness for their libraries. Also, at Joy's request, I did a 4-part series on actually walking librarians who are members of ARSL, the Association for Rural and Small Libraries, through actually writing a disaster plan. And I love working with librarians because you guys you get things done. You don't sit on it. You keep moving on it. So a lot of people did actually succeed in getting the plan done, which can be one of those things that's really easy to put on the back burner. So these are some, ideas for what we could all do together going forward. I think you might also want to know, I'm going to be taking some training in how to do tabletop scenarios and lead trainings through that, which is where you take a plan and then you imagine some terrible thing has happened and you see how well it works to kind of walk through that scenario. So I will feel much more capable of leading those in a couple months' time. Just quickly, a few other things. There's a cohort burbling up with Joy and with Eileen Corcoran at VHS and a number of public librarians who have special collections. And we'll be presenting, we did a webinar a couple months ago, and we'll be presenting at the Vermont Library Association meeting in a couple weeks. And we're looking to get folks together for a community of practice around their special collections, which we are thinking very broadly what that might be, taxidermy, local history collection. And that's going to be the material that in a disaster you might be most interested in trying to preserve and salvage. So that's kind of a natural place for us to kind of lean into emergency preparedness and response work. In terms of other groups that are available for response, the Northeast Document Conservation Center has a 24/7 hotline that you can call if you need help. You're also welcome to call VACDARN. And there's national groups that we have connections to, the National Heritage Responders. One of our VACDARN members is a responder. And HENTEF, which is the Heritage Emergency National Task Force. We also have a member of that group on our steering committee. So we've got some strength and some depth here in Vermont, surprisingly, in this sector, and are willing and able and really look forward to working with you to help you when you have the opportunity to focus on emergency preparedness and response work. And I'm happy to take questions or talk more about some other stuff.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I'm going to open it up to working group members. Please come back on camera if you're able to and willing, and share any questions or comments that you have with Rachel.
Let's put a hand up.
Wendy.
Yes, well, thank you for talking to us. Right at the very beginning, you said that rather than it be that emergency preparedness, rather than it being just a job to check off a list, it should be something that is a mindset. So how do you get from that, okay, I've got my plan, now how do you get that to being part of your mindset?
That's a great question, Wendy. You can develop a mantra that you say every day. I say that slightly tongue-in-cheek, but what we say is you need to exercise that plan once you have it. So the idea is to do trainings, to have a lunch and learn where you walk through a scenario that would be likely within your library environment, where it doesn't have to always be worst case scenarios. I tend to go there, but went out, you keeping it, like what could happen? Like, what would I do if a family showed up at the door? Like, what would I do if I got the call Friday night at midnight that a pipe had burst? Just try to, like, do you have a plan? And if you don't, it's not that you have to have a plan, but do you know who to talk to get a plan? And that's often that can be just the key part, is that you don't have to know all the answers. And another cliche in this realm is that no two disasters are alike. Like, you may have one and you get through it, and it's really important to have a debrief after and to talk about what went right and what went wrong, and so that's kind of part of how you exercise, is if you actually have disasters. And I wouldn't wish another Irene on Vermont, but they can be handy, like to have just and it happens in your own house, like suddenly there's a leak. Okay, what do I do? And walking through what the steps might be for that. So much better if we can just do that in the realm of scenario and not real life. But that exercising can really help develop that mindset.
Questions from other working group members? One thing, Rachel, that was really interesting to me as you were presenting, you commented about mass climate migration potentially arriving in more people who need really kind of help with everything. The other topic that's on our agenda for today is social services in libraries. And so thinking about not just what we need now in our libraries, but what we might need to help people with social services in the future, if we have a big throng of folks who are coming in response, particularly, I would think like an emergency arrival, not people like me who fled California, but people with wildfires, but people who are sort of en masse arriving on our doorsteps, and what we might do in that situation to help people who really have, they fled quickly from an imminent disaster or a disaster in another adjacent state or even adjacent country. I could imagine all kinds of things could happen. So that's something for us to think about in that social services, that space where social services and emergency preparedness overlap.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you paired them today. And I think that and I see Ben is still on the meeting. So maybe, I don't know if you want to jump in, Ben. Is that still what's keeping you up at night?
Really, nothing keeps me up at night these days. I sleep hard. No, it's coming. And thank you, Rachel, for bringing up the state hazard mitigation plan, which is.
Did you not talk about that?
I didn't. It just. Right, we're rewriting it, and I will add in my the follow-up I'm going to send to Catherine links to how to participate in the upcoming outreach meetings for that. The brass ring target objective in our 2018 state hazard mitigation plan was we really need a state hazard mitigation program that's not dependent on FEMA funding and rules. And then the pandemic came along, and out of crisis came opportunity, and now we have the Flood Resilient Community Fund. So we actually achieved our target, our number one target. And I don't think we have the big idea yet for the 2023 plan. So these upcoming meetings are good opportunities to think big together.
If I can make a request, I would really love to see something that happens a lot with libraries, especially because about half of our public libraries in Vermont are incorporated libraries. They're not municipal libraries. People in municipalities just don't think of that resource, and they don't think that they have a responsibility to the resource, even though it serves the public in the municipality. So if the plan as it's being developed, if there are spaces within the plan when it talks about who should be engaged at the local level in emergency, in hazard mitigation planning and in hazard mitigation response, calling out the full resources of the community and partners in public libraries, both municipal and incorporated, in schools, both municipal and independent, both public and independent. It just seems like with schools, they often both get included, but with libraries, they don't often get included. So if the more that we can kind of insert that language into the planning documents, the more likely that the plan's going to encompass both of the types of libraries when we get to that point, if we need it.
Rachel, maybe the 2023 state hazard mitigation plan needs to really elevate and boost VACDARN.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Go up and
I
say
think
so.
I really liked when you were speaking earlier that when you talked about how librarians should make sure that the libraries are included in the local emergency management plans. And I had a call from a clerk recently who wanted to know how to go about getting, her permanent public records, how to build that into the LEMP. And so that's a conversation that you and I maybe can have with some of your colleagues.
Yeah, and you hit it on the head when you talked about exercising, training and exercising, and it's an old military axiom that plans are worthless and planning is priceless. And it's also said that no plan withstands first contact with the enemy. But the process of trying to put together a plan and think about what is the one page of phone numbers I actually need to have at my fingertips at all times in case the worst thing happens. That's the part of the plan that's actionable.
Yeah, you're top of my list, Ben.
That's frightening.
Well, I want to thank you, Rachel, for your time and encourage you both, Ben and Rachel, to stay on if you have the ability to. We are going to hear next from Matthew Ballerman, who is joining us. Matthew is from the Sustainable Libraries Initiative, and want to turn it over to Matthew for the next 20 minutes for him to share out about his group's work. And I think he's got a PowerPoint. There it is.
Hi, you can see that?
Yeah, we can, yeah.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. My name is Matt Ballerman, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer at the Hauppauge Public Library, which is on Long Island in New York in Suffolk County. And I'm the Vice President of the Advisory Board for the Sustainable Libraries Initiative. So I've been on and listened to Ben and listened to Rachel present, and I feel as though some of the questions that came up we might be able to help with. So first off, we're a volunteer organization. We have a few paid staff, but most of us who have done this work for the last 7 years are volunteers. And basically what we're here to do is to help library leaders to think about these topics, right? We want to make sure that our communities remain viable, that they maybe even are regenerative, and help us stay around as a species. We think that's an important thing. And so we think libraries are the key to help with that effort. So why is that? Well, we're trusted, right? People trust libraries in the community. People look to us for their information. They want to look to us to help them through the challenges that they have. So we think that that's something that can keep us to make sure our communities improve. So we're getting the call for this from the top levels of our organization. The American Library Association has sustainability as a core value, along with things like the public good, intellectual freedom, and and service, and all the other core values that we have. So we're really proud of that. That the fact that we're getting kind of the permission to do this work from the top. And in my mind, I think our mission statements that we have locally are part of this work as well. So for instance, most mission statements say that you're there to serve your community. And that word is, how do you define that? Does your community have good air? Is the community ground being taken care of? Is the water in good shape? So to me, there's the chance for your library to help participate in all those things. So I think Ben's point about saying, hey, are you in your local emergency plan, is pretty important, right? And so are you advocating that the library is there? And Catherine, you made the point of saying, can we be in the plan? We would argue at the Sustainable Libraries Initiative, you should be knocking on that door and demanding to be at the table. Don't wait. Just show up and say, hey, libraries are here. Libraries are important. We should be a part of this. Ask those questions. So we define sustainability as using the triple bottom line, and that when decisions are being made, that you're thinking through this lens. That question of mindset, for us, it begins here. We're trying to make and have people start to think about the choices they make as holding all of these three things at once, as opposed to just the question of economically feasible. And Ben, I think, really pointed out that a lot in his presentation about how the government thinks about, well, it's a lot less expensive for us to raise a house in a flooding area than to pay for it again later. So they're balancing these decisions when they're offering these monies. It's not just economics. It has other components because it makes environmental sense in the conditions that they're under. So we're hoping that that people start to think with these three things in mind as they move forward. So we think that if you were considered a sustainable library, you're going to be one of the key institutions in your community. We think that you're going to help make change, keep people together. When the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change meets at the UN, they often come back and saying the things that communities need to survive climate change is that they know each other, that they can have a place to get together and make decisions, and that all voices can be heard. And what better place in the community to do that than the library? And we believe that libraries can step into that void and step into those spaces and say, we're here and we're ready and we're willing to work with you to make sure that we survive through this, that we can get to that other side. We think that you have the resources and you have the connections and the places to do it. And most likely, you're already doing a lot of this work already. We think that you can help with climate mitigation, mostly as an example, all the great monies that are available in Vermont to have a plan to make your institution as climate friendly as possible. And then you're demonstrating that back to others in the community on how you did it, and then telling that story over and over and over again. And of course, helping with climate adaptation. So when some new visitor comes to your community, what are you going to do for them? How are you going to handle those new challenges? So how do you do it? How do you create this massive systematic change? Well, we have a few solutions. Again, we are volunteers who've put this together. We offer a roadmap to sustainability, which you can get for free at our website, which I'll put in the chat. and that will allow you to start to gather your thinking about this topic. You might be able to write down, it gives you a place to write down things you're already doing and some of the vocabulary that we use in talking about this. And then if you feel as though you want to move forward, we have a sustainable library certification program. And this program is set up as a benchmarking system that you can demonstrate back to your community, to your funders, to others that you're taking the investment made to you and turning around and doing the best with that investment, that you are making the decisions for your community that are following the triple bottom line, that you are thinking about more than just delivering value and added value, that you're also thinking about the earth and the air and the ground and all other aspects of what it means for your community to be secure. So it's step by step. There's a mentor that helps with the program. It has plenty of built-in resources and offers a community of practice for those who undertake that program. We have a public and academic version that covers these various topics. And of course, I heard a lot today about community resiliency. So it'll address the library's role in that and how you're adding to that. And then, of course, we have a school librarians program that currently is only available in New York, but that is an individual's work towards thinking about this topic, where the public and academic is more institution-based. This is kind of what it looks like when you're in it. There's various required actions, and then there are optional actions. And you can see the varying degrees of things. So about planting and native plants and using pesticides and herbicides. And this is just one small area of this whole list of things that are there. So what happens if you go through it? It kind of provides that path, right? It provides you a way to start to organize your thinking. It recognizes things you're already doing. It's a reflective process. Makes you think about, okay, why did we do this, or how did we get there, or what did we learn from this? It takes you step by step, which is really, I think, very powerful. It shows you that community of practice. And I think the main thing is it really raises your profile in the community as being a leader on this topic. And some examples, definitely the picture down at the right is a colleague of mine. That's our county executive. So that's Steve Ballone at the Lindenhurst Public Library when they opened up with electric chargers of vehicle charging stations that the county was investing in to increase that capability in our communities. They chose the Lindenhurst Library as the place to make that announcement because they had done work to make that connection and be known that they were interested in that. So we felt that that was, when we started working on this 7 years ago, that to me was showing that we were successful, that someone outside our community, outside of libraries, recognized the library's role in helping be a demonstration to how to do things for the community. So to have our county executive be there was massive. That was a real big thing for us. We're very high-fiving about that one. So we believe that this is not something you run and complete. It's that mindset change. It's that developing your internal capabilities of working this way. And that just is ongoing because every day new things arise. So we hope that this initiative and these products help, these tools help you to do that. Vermont has been very active in our program. We have 18 libraries have joined us and are working towards their Sustainable Library Certification program. I think they're all public libraries. And we have Margaret Woodruff, who's the director of the Charlotte Library, is a member of our advisory board. So she is our only out-of-state member at this point, out of New York State. Most of us are in New York where it began. And she's fantastic and brings a great perspective for our smaller libraries and how their challenges are in doing this work as Rachel brought up before, like if you're able to get to this. We really believe that every job is a climate job at this point, and not just in libraries, but in everywhere. So people need to be thinking about how they're contributing to adding to the changes that our environment is fastly going through. But we're happy to see that there's a group of Vermont libraries trying to work at this. So this is kind of how it works. There's some free stuff on our website, which I put into the chat. You could become a member, which gets you to some curated things and some of our vendor lists and access to some on-demand training. And then there's the certification program, which has a fee to it in order to support some of the staff that we have that does the administrative work for us to keep this going. We're not in the profit-making business. We're just here to try to keep this going and making sure that libraries go through. None of us receive any funds for this work. We're just volunteers who are trying to keep libraries relevant in their communities. And we think that this is a place for them to do so, in addition to being what I consider the most vital work that any library can be doing right now, and being a human on the planet at this point, is to make sure that it's still there for our futures. So that's me. I'm down here in Hop Hog this morning, and happy to be speaking to you all. And I would welcome any questions.
Thank you so much, Matthew. This is really great information, and we'll be hearing from Margaret a little bit, actually, very at the end of the day, which is really great. And just to mention, in response to a couple of things in the chat, some of the social services that we'll be hearing about are these sorts of emergency response things that libraries have done. I'm gonna, such as the cooling centers and the resources. Heating centers. I want to mention really quickly that there's a list of resources that we have from Monica Antonoli, who's a professor at Minnesota State University, who's been involved in a survey to sort of gauge those emergency responses. And we do know that there will be a report of that survey at the ALA conference later this year. So maybe we'll get to hear from her about that at some point later. I want to turn it over to Wendy Sharkey, who's got her hand up for a question.
Yes, there's just a couple of things. How long would it take an average library to go through the certification process, and exactly how much would it cost?
The first question is that there's no time frame for that, but we're seeing libraries basically taking about 18 months to get through it. When all is said and done, that's probably the average, anywhere from 18 months to 2 years. We have had a pandemic in the midst of this, so some of the results may vary. But for folks that have taken it on, we've seen one recently, like the Curtis Memorial Library in Maine just went through, and they got through fairly breezily. They got through pretty quick. Other libraries, it took us here in Hop Hog. I started in 2018. I finished like 2 years ago. So because we really got bogged down in obviously dealing with COVID-19. The cost varies. It really depends on the size library right now. That's how it's broken down. So if you go to the website, there's a pricing model there.
Thank you.
I think, Catherine, maybe one part I didn't really emphasize in the presentation was, obviously we're talking a lot about buildings. We're talking about facilities and resilience and those types of issues. And while I breezed through the categories with being cognizant of the time constraints that I had, is that it covers all of that, right? It's talking about how you're responding with all the assets that the library has. So, we are managing collections, technology, facility, all those things. And this program tries to have all of those choices be in line with the value of helping the community make those resources not impact the earth in adverse ways, right? So that we're all pulling in one direction. So what I've heard from Ben and Rachel are tons of resources that help. I think where our work is floats a little bit above that, and it gives kind of a wider lens across how you're going to make choices from everything from which copy paper do we want to use, because that has an impact, to is my facility going to manage through the next weather event. I've never heard of a debris event, so that's a new thing I have to now stay up at night and think about. But you know, are we able to manage from all of this different things? And we hope that the certification program brings you through those series of choices.
Thank you. That's really helpful. So thinking about not just how we respond, but how do we not contribute to making those climate change disasters more likely in a way.
Exactly. So when we were developing this program and over the years, we've used to talk about capacity and the idea that, what do these words mean? And so if we're sustainable, that kind of means you're not going below, right? You're basically staying at the level. So we always viewed it as my nose was just above the water and I could keep breathing. Where resilient means I got pushed under the water and I was able to bounce back, but my nose was still above the water. If I was able to be regenerative, I'm actually adding more energy back into the system. And really, that's what we're hoping libraries are, because we are doing that now. In the investments that were made, we tend to give back much more in value. So if we're able to be a regenerative organization and really pump up what we give back to our communities, that to me is the place libraries should be recognized as doing. And then communities would just look at us and say, well, of course you're here. Of course you're at this meeting. Of course you're helping us do this. That's what you do. Day in and day out, you help our community be a better place. And what we find is that there's a hesitancy to step into that leadership role in the community, but we feel it's waiting right there. It's waiting right there for libraries to do.
Well, I want to thank you so much. I'm sorry that we didn't have more time with you, Matt, and also with Rachel and with Ben. We may be in touch in the future if we have other topics. Now that we know the scope of each of your work, it's really been very informative to have you here today, and we appreciate your willingness to share, and we appreciate that the Sustainable Libraries Initiative, as you said, is a volunteer activity, which is amazing that you're giving so much of yourselves to this important topic for all libraries in the country. I love that you've taken the time to develop a course, a certificate program for school libraries, and then a separate one for public and academic. It really reflects knowledge of libraries in general to split those into two tracks. So we just really appreciate your time today.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And you're welcome, of course, to stay on and hear more or pop in and out today throughout the day. So thank you for making the time to be with us. Jeanette Schaefer is going to share with the working group. Part of our charge is to consider not just emergency preparedness, but also how did we respond to the most recent emergency that we had, and what are some of the impacts of the COVID-19 public health emergency on libraries. And Jeanette's going to share this morning about the department's COVID response, and then we will hear from Josh Muse this afternoon, also from the Department of Libraries, about the specific impacts and things like library closures. So this portion from Jeanette is really going to be about what did the department do to support public libraries in not just public, all libraries in Vermont in responding to the COVID-19 emergency, and what did we learn, what went well. So Jeanette's gonna share now.
Thank you. And can you see my slideshow?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm Jeanette Schaefer. I'm the Assistant State Librarian and LST Coordinator, which is the Library Services and Technology Act, which is the funding source for most of our federal funding that we're receiving right now through the Institute of Museum and Library Services. So I'm the liaison basically to IMLS. So today I'm just going to cover some of the aspects of our COVID response to help libraries better respond as well. We serve mostly librarians and libraries. We don't serve, except for the Able Library, end users directly. So whatever we do is really in support of the libraries around the state. So we're going to go over how we manage the information through different outlets, so email, meetups, county meetings, offered continuing education and grants, and also purchases. So when COVID first happened, you all might remember how much information came out all the time. And I had joined the department right before the pandemic and realized that we were already sending out too many emails to the listservs regularly, and they came from different people all day long. And when this happened and we saw even more information that we needed to share, we stuck our heads together and figured out how we could consolidate the information that would go out. And we came up with what we refer to internally as the digest. Externally, you all know this as the resource update, which came out daily during the height of the pandemic. And we have now dialed back to twice weekly, along with a once a week continuing education update. So Tuesdays and Fridays, we have the resource update, and Wednesdays, Joy sends out the continuing education update. We've really been able to consolidate the communication out to libraries this way. It also gives us a way to share resources from our collaborative partners as well, so other state entities that just need to get the word out about things. So this was one of the things that we adopted during the pandemic, and that we're keeping up as well. So then we offered during the height of the pandemic just-in-time resource pages. As you'll remember, so much information came out, so much guidance changed constantly, and the resource pages were intended to help libraries figure out how the guidance would apply to them and how, with the information that we provided, they could make local decisions about things like being open, mask wearing before it was a mandate, curbside services, and so on. Most of those pages have been retired now, but we now know that we have the ability to ramp those up at any time, and just this was a all hands on deck event, obviously, and all of us contributed to those resource pages. We also developed the status survey, status as in, are you open? What kind of service are you providing? Are you requiring folks to wear masks? And what kind of services do you offer when you do curbside? The status survey is something that Josh will talk about this afternoon. It was something that he developed and that he curated and managed during the pandemic, and that he'll probably talk about the future of the status survey as well. So that's something he'll get into later. So that was how we were able to manage and consolidate information without additionally overwhelming libraries. Obviously, everybody was overwhelmed. There was so much information that came out, and hopefully we were able to consolidate that a little bit into manageable chunks. We also offered lots of meetups, and these meetups sometimes had a theme that we would invite a guest from the Department of Health or ACCD, UVM. We had a bunch of people presenting, and sometimes we would just assemble folks to come and talk about their woes and the difficulties of managing libraries during a pandemic, and the communication difficulties with patrons, with their town managers, and just the stuff that came up that really gave libraries a lot of, or library leaders a lot of anxiety. So sometimes they were casual and unstructured. Sometimes we had presentations. We really kind of played it by ear, and we offered them weekly starting in March 2020, and then through the early 2021, and then moved to biweekly as needed. And topics really covered everything from evolving state regulations, how to stay connected with patrons, air quality. We talked a lot about air quality, outdoor programming, how to offer services when your building is shuttered. So these were really helpful, and it gave librarians and trustees a way to network while they were really shut in during that time. We had before the pandemic county meetings, which gave folks a local networking platform and boosted those during the pandemic and offered 25 meetings during that those first few months. And we usually had attendance of 5 to 12 people. So we were able to reach folks through the county meetings, an existing structure that we maintain now as well. But we meet less frequently with the counties, usually quarterly. It kind of depends on the counties too, but that is something that we had before the pandemic. We elevated during the pandemic, and now we're back to a normal regular schedule again. And of course, the topic at hand was COVID-19 and all of the difficulties that the pandemic presented for libraries. We also very much changed the way that we were doing continuing education. We had done a lot of in-person continuing education before the pandemic, some online as well. And we also sponsored attendance at conferences before the pandemic. So we would take some of the LSTA funds and send 2 or 3 librarians from the state to a national conference, and then have them come back and present. Well, once there were no in-person conferences, we shifted to sponsoring attendance at several national virtual conferences and trainings. And the beauty of that was really that we were able to send a lot more people to these trainings, and we sent them to the ALA annual and also mid-year conference, ARSL. We offered attendance at library journal and school library journal programs. We purchased blocks of PCI webinars and LibraryWorks webinars that we made available to staff to attend. And whenever we would send virtually folks to a conference or a training, we would invite them. One of the requirements was that they would come back and do lightning talks just to present their most important takeaways, so that we could also just have them share their experiences. And for those folks that couldn't attend, they could learn something regardless. So that's how we changed that. I think it's a good model. It's a little bit more equitable to offer attendance at virtual events rather than having just 2 or 3 people from the state travel to a conference. So we're kind of evaluating where we're going with that. Internally, we also increased our webinar offerings. So webinars where we would have our internal departmental experts present, or where we would partner with folks and invite them to provide trainings. We've had Rachel many times and hope to have Rachel more often. And it sounds like Matt, you might be coming too. So we hope to continue the level of offerings that we developed during the pandemic as well. And you see the topics that we offered here. Again, we talked a lot about air quality. We offered one webinar on DIY ventilation systems and HR best practices during this very difficult period for human resources management. We talked about budgeting, grant writing, how to keep the public engaged, and just also offered some health and wellness topics this time. We don't usually offer sessions on yoga and wellness and work-life balance, but during the height of the pandemic, we offered those as well, just to help librarians stay somewhat sane during this period. And then the Certificate of Public Librarianship has been a program that we had been offering before, that we continue to offer, but we saw growth during the pandemic in the program, and we also had to shift the way that we were celebrating folks that graduated from the program, and we shifted to doing online certificate awards. We created a video that was really celebratory, and we had a little online party for folks that graduated that in 2020. Next week is, no, in 2 weeks is VLA, and we will be awarding those certificates again in person, which will be nice to do as well. We also very much changed the way that we offer continuing education for trustees. So before the pandemic, we did an in-person conference that was once a year, and we had folks, I think we had been trying to connect it to the VLA conference as well. That had shifted a little bit as well, but during the pandemic, we decided to offer a 5-day online conference for trustees and friends. That was the first time that we had done any online training for trustees, because trustees generally hadn't been that open to attending conferences and trainings virtually, but that had obviously shifted since everybody had jumped onto Zoom and Zooming with family and friends, and people had been become more comfortable attending things virtually. So we had a really great outcome. We had 232 registrants, which we'd never seen that many trustees at once. And we had structured the conference to have synchronous and asynchronous sessions. We had a recorded keynote. We had facilitated listserv discussions and even a trivia game. And we received great feedback on this event. And what we've shifted to now is trying to offer more CE and trainings that has both trustees and library leaders in the room together, especially when it comes to policy setting trainings, strategic planning trainings, because we've really seen the benefit of both roles being in the room and learning together and then applying that knowledge together. So we learned a lot about how we can integrate trustees throughout the year and not just during a once a year in-person touch point.
Jeanette, I'm going to just jump in because I know that you've got some additional slides about the specifics of the things that were procured with the IMLS funding, but we are almost at the end of the time for you. So I want to just give folks a chance to comment or ask questions of Jeanette Schaefer, who has really done a phenomenal job of leading the way with this. And I want to also thank Tom McMurdo, who was the interim state librarian during much of the time that this grant program was being rolled out, and I know played a very large part in working with Jeanette on this, developing the plans. Also, I do want to say a lot of the COVID response, we had someone working in our team who had just really helped us has really helped us both with the with kind of just behind the scenes stuff of making this all happen. So I just want to thank Sam, who worked with us as a temp, Sam Kelly, who really just kind of has helped with the reporting. You wouldn't believe how much goes on behind the scenes to make this happen. And also Lucy Fortier, who is our grants and contracts administrator, just to give folks some credit. I know a lot of other people in the department were helping with that. But are there any questions for Jeanette about the department's COVID response or learning?
Hi, this is Meg. Hi, Jeanette.
Hi, Meg.
Not so much a question, but just a thank you for gratitude. I mean, it's looking back at 3 years ago, and how far we've come. It was a really scary time, and librarians and libraries were looking for answers, and the DOL was right there, had our backs. And so I just want to thank you for, on behalf of librarians, even in the school libraries, like we really all pitched together and got through that time, and I think we got through it stronger. And what we did see is that, like, our communities, libraries are the places where people need to go during times of whether flooding or pandemics that were so integral. So just thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and it was really the entire staff. Everybody had their hands in this, and we were constantly just churning out information and collaborating with each other to give you all the best that we had. So it was an all department thing. Thank
And
you.
sometimes even making deliveries, Jeanette had shared that on this slide right now, things were delivered within 45 miles of each library, and Vance Haslund from our team was really helpful with that. So it was an all hands on deck moment. And I came at the end of it and was just really impressed by the work that the department did. And the work that people did locally to keep their libraries open and all of the information sharing that went on. So just two things to highlight here, working group members. Just remember, we saw this big impact with COVID about going online, and really that's impacted how we're doing training now moving forward, the accessibility of those trainings and the attendance at the trainings. And the communication coming out of the department has really increased, and we'll keep it at that more robust level. So we often think of the negative impacts of emergencies, but we've had two positives that we can speak to. So thank you, Jeanette. I know that you'll be here if we have any follow-up questions during our discussion in a little bit. And now I want to turn it over to Carolyn Brennan. Sorry to be so rushed this morning. We tried to fit everybody in and it feels a little frantic. Good morning, Carolyn.
Good morning. I am delivering comments on emergency preparedness this morning. And I will start by saying that the Kellogg Hubbard Library not only serves the city of Montpelier, but we serve the surrounding towns of Berlin, Calais, East Montpelier, Middlesex, and Worcester. So we're a mix of a more urban setting, a population center, but also surrounding rural towns. So the theme of my testimony is that whether or not it is part of the public library's mission, or whether we are the best resource, the arguably best resource, we're regularly called upon to offer emergency services and essential services in support of our member communities. So I'll start with the day that I submitted my written testimony last week, or a couple weeks ago. We were in the middle of a very heavy wet snowstorm, and it led to multiple power outages in our service area. There was widespread loss of internet connectivity. There was disruption of heat in people's homes. There was loss of essential communications infrastructure. And because the library is a resilient space, we have buried power lines, we have buried fiber internet, we are in a downtown location. So we were able to maintain those services. And as a result, we had people in every available space in the library who had lost connection in one way or another at their homes. And so they were here to stay warm in some cases, which is a service that we provide every day when the weather gets cold. In some capacity or another. They were here because we had power and we had internet. And so these are people who work from home and who were using the library as a work from home space, or to keep tabs on when services came back up at their own home. So for people who don't have unlimited data, or for whom data is not an availability at their own location, being able to come in here and connect to our Wi-Fi and have connectivity was a huge way for them to engage with their work, stay productive, and stay safe and warm and healthy in an emergency, in a weather emergency. We have had suggestions from our community that the library be better equipped to offer some of these services, or have a more formal arrangement with our municipalities to offer these services. Because as I say, at this point, we do it in a de facto way. But it is not, it's germane to our mission, but it is not, it's not a written part of our mission. So we've had suggestions that we have a generator or collaborate in different ways. At one point, we were also the emergency location for evacuations from the elementary school. We no longer provide this because we lack the available physical space at this time for the size of the school. But that's another way that the library has served as an emergency service in the past. So now I want to speak a little bit to warming, cooling, and housing. The library is in Washington County. Services for people experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity are managed by a confederation of churches and nonprofits with support from municipalities. And the library coordinates with other social service organizations to provide a warming space in the winter, to provide a cooling space in the summer, which is increasingly important as we're experiencing the impacts of climate change. We keep accurate and up-to-date information. We reach out and actively seek information that we can then distribute to people who are coming into the library about where they can go for meals and for shelter. And to connect with outreach services or mental health services or resources, economic services. We do a lot of pointing people to food. We also offer one of a very few locally available public bathrooms. There are not a lot of public bathrooms in downtown Montpelier. And particularly in the evenings when the municipal offices close and the State House closes, the library is the place that you can go to use the bathroom. And that was increasingly impactful. We saw that as a major impact in the COVID-19 pandemic, where bathrooms, basic services were very, very hard to come by. So in support of this aspect of our services, we have rewritten our behavior rules to create the least restrictive environment that we can in the public library and still make sure that everyone can access the space equally. So we're more tolerant of different behaviors, we're more tolerant of different voice levels, and our overarching rule is just that nobody's use of the library space can infringe upon anyone else's ability to access the library space. So we all have to coexist together in this building. We are, as a cooling shelter, that's a service that we started last summer when it became increasingly apparent that that was a need in town. Our library, like many other Vermont libraries, is old, and it's also very large. It's very difficult to keep cool. We do have a plan or we are working on a plan to address that, but this is a very complex building to cool effectively. We have a large skylight that works against that effort, and we have to, and we are also a historic site, so we have to coordinate with lots of different resources to work through this very. We are 19,000 square feet, so this very large, old, complex building to cool. But that's something that that we need to do at this point for everyone that uses the library, but particularly for people that have a real need and inability personally to get out of extreme weather. So beginning last summer, we do have one meeting room that through grant funding, we were able to add cooling to. And so in the summertime, when the weather gets hot, if we go over a certain temperature, that becomes our designated cooling space. And anyone can go in there and camp out and work or cool off. Even my staff members do that in the upstairs of the library in the summertime. It gets up to 88 degrees. And that's better than it used to be because now we put a tarp over our skylight. So it used to be worse. So we are in the regular winter rotation of warming shelters in the city of Montpelier in Washington County. I just spoke with the executive director of a local social services organization last night on the phone to reaffirm this, because at this time we're seeing funding and resources for other warming shelters, other places where you can go if you have no place to go. That's the funding for that is winding down, either because of the funding impacts of the ending of the COVID-19 pandemic, partially also because of the time of year. This is a transitional time of year in those types of services. So we see that emergency overflow shelters typically close in April. Not to open again until November, and so this is a time when there is fewer resources available, and that need doesn't go away just yet. Your own heat in your house isn't going to go off at night until, and at least for another month. We see people that come in here to get out of the cold all the time. When we had a recent cold snap, we coordinated with social services organizations to make sure that there was continuous 24/7 coverage. And so the library played a very important role in that.
Carolyn?
Yes.
We have just a couple minutes remaining
please.
For folks to ask you questions. This information you've shared is so helpful. I know that the next time that my internet goes out, instead of hotspotting my phone, to continue doing my work, I will be walking a couple of blocks over to the Kellogg Hubbard Library.
Yeah.
It just didn't realize. So how wonderful that you provide that resource, which I need to the community, and that you've done the planning to have the foresight to do that. Folks on the working group, do you have any questions for Carolyn? It seems to speak to another topic that we heard about earlier, it seems like your library sort of has an emergency preparedness mindset already. And I wonder sort of how do you foster that, and what have you done to kind of keep emergency planning and to keep yourself at the table in those conversations? Maybe you could just speak briefly to how you've gotten so involved and how you maintain your involvement locally.
Sure, predominantly through outreach. So there are two committees that in the city of Montpelier, there's a homelessness task force and there is a housing task force. And so I have attended those meetings. We really backed into it in a way. When I started at the KHL in 2016, we were seeing increased use by all different types of people, but one particular, we started becoming this de facto winter warming shelter. And so there was an obvious need, there was an obvious gap, and we needed to figure out how to support those folks. So I connected with the other providers in our area and said, this is something that we're seeing at the library. And then at first the conversation was, oh, you are? And I'm like, yes, we are. And so now I have regularly met and I regularly attend these meetings because there's more of a lens on it in our community at this time. But making sure, I think it's important to make sure, as this has become a more national problem with public libraries, it's become a Vermont problem, challenge, opportunity. I shouldn't call it a problem. That's not really fair. But as this has become an increasing need in Vermont libraries, and we're seeing it here, as I think the natural next step is to say, okay, well, how do we do this? How do we do this well? And where is the need, and who can we connect with, and who are the experts? So it's really been a work of outreach and communication.
Thank you so much. I think that Jeanette Bear has a question for you.
Yeah, hi, sorry, I'm joining by my phone today for the first time. I can't seem to get connected on a computer, so I don't know all the steps. Anyway, my question is, do you know of anywhere, or tell me where in Montpelier that there are showers and laundry facilities available to the public who might need a changing station?
Yeah, the only one that I know of is at a nonprofit called Another Way. And Another Way is on Berry Street, and they're predominantly a peer support mental health resource, but they're another nonprofit like the KHL that has become, now most of what they do is in support of people experiencing homelessness. And so they offer laundry vouchers, and they do have laundry vouchers for the local laundromat so that people can do their laundry locally. And they have showers that are available during the day that people can go and use. So that's typically where we send folks.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks so much. I want to keep on schedule, and I see that Sharon White from Alice M. Ward Memorial Library in Canaan is here for our 11 o'clock spot. So Carolyn, I want to thank you for coming. Thank you for writing your comments and for sharing with us here today. You're welcome to stay on and hear from others, but I know you're also super busy all the time at Kellogg Hubbard, so you're also welcome to jump off. And I'm going to turn it over to Sharon Ellingwood White.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can, Sharon. It's great to see you.
Great. Thank you so much for having me come. It was great to listen to all the great things at Kellogg Hubbard. I'm the library director at the Alice Ward Library in Canaan, Vermont. Canaan is our northeast corner town, in Vermont, in Essex County. We are bordered by West Stewartstown, New Hampshire, and Quebec. We are 1 hour and 25 minutes one way past St. Johnsbury and 40 minutes one way past Island Pond, if that gives you some picture of our isolation from those places that you often think about when you think about the Northeast Kingdom and Essex County. In over 575 square miles in the county, we have 1 high school, no hospitals, and no pharmacies in our entire county, which was highlighted in the pandemic when our residents in 80 and 90-year-old age bands were asked to travel over 1 hour each way to get a vaccine, a COVID vaccine, at Vermont pharmacies, when there were New Hampshire pharmacies 4 miles away that they could not access. So when I talk about emergency preparedness in the context of our particular library, I think that our isolation, geographic isolation, and how rural and sparsely populated we are is really important. And you might think we're not busy if we are that remote and rural, but we are very busy. We serve the Vermont towns of Norton, Leamington, Averill, and the Gores and unincorporated areas, Bloomfield, Vermont, and other New Hampshire towns, because West Stewartstown is just 500 yards away, and their children attend our schools. We are an emergency site for heating and cooling, just as you heard testimony from the library in Montpelier. And when there is not hard infrastructure in our area, which there is not, our active, vocal, welcoming, and advocating library is the place. Last week or a couple weeks ago at town meeting, time flies, one of our residents stood up and said, our library is the best thing going in this town. And often for emergency problems, it feels like the only, place to go. We're a heating center, a cooling center. We host meetings for local community members to have meetings with agencies like Higher Ability, who wouldn't have another place really to meet with an individual who needs services. We have New Hampshire students in high schools who are Vermont residents that are adult learners that meet with VSAC in our library. This is going to kind of roll over into community and social resources, which I know you're going to hear testimony about later, but it blends for us because we do everything. In other emergency and safety type realms, we work with, we promote Efficiency Vermont and the Heat Squad. Our towns surrounding Canaan have the highest energy burden in the state of Vermont in energy studies, which means the most of our income goes toward energy than any other place in the state. But we really don't have the people coming in the infrastructure for people to get help with that. So it lands on us. We do not have food security here. The Vermont Food Bank does not come here. Everyone Eats doesn't come here. Veggie Van Go doesn't come here. The Vermont Food Bank doesn't come here. We've had volunteers from the library that drive to places over an hour away where those drops are to bring food back to our community and to our school. And that's kind of de facto fallen on the library. We have the Canadian border nearby, and we served hundreds and hundreds of people that needed to use an app to cross the border, people from all over the world and all over the country that got turned around at customs to come back to our library to get across the border. And is that an emergency? I'll tell you, if you're 85 years old and you're from Connecticut and you're with strangers and you don't have a cell phone or a smartphone or an email account, to get to your family in Canada because you didn't know, that's an emergency for that person. I also want to highlight that my position as library director is funded for 25 hours a week to do this work, plus run a library. The reason I wrote to the working group, because I heard there wasn't a lot of testimony on today's topic, was to explain that I do not have time to respond for this important testimony in our unique situation, because just last week I'm working on my summer reading program grants, our annual report, town meeting stuff, budget stuff after the meeting, our capital project needs assessment, plus running the library and a a small staff that I have. So I really wanted to take the time to express that that rural libraries are part of an rural and emergency infrastructure in ways you never know that you're going to be. And it's so much beyond books, which I know you all know. I'm preaching to the choir, as the expression goes. But I'm doing this in half the time. I need all the 25 hours I have just to do library work. And the social and emergency work that I do is it's very overwhelming right now. It was overwhelming in the pandemic. We have been a vaccine site. I have driven to get test kits when that was first on a thing. I just listened to the testimony about the distribution of the amazing PPE that we got. And someone testified that every drop was in 45 miles of a Vermont library. And I looked it up, and we are 65 miles from the closest drop for the PPE, which I drove to get into our area. So this is what I do. And that's why I'm here today. Do you have any questions, or just going as fast as I can, trying to get it all out?
Thank you so much, Sharon. I really appreciate it. And I'm sorry that we didn't get that right about how far we were from you. Having been up to visit you in Canaan, I can say my phone certainly thought I was in Canada for most of the drive, and
Yep.
it was an interesting day. So I definitely got the feeling that we were that the service you're providing, it can be a little bit isolating, and that your community, as you shared today, has a lot of need, and that the library is jumping in wherever you can to solve local, federal, border, all kinds of other issues. And so just really grateful to you and your team for the work that you're doing. I want to open it up to the folks in our working group to ask you questions about what you've shared, both in writing and your oral statements today.
Hi, Wendy. Wendy has her hand up.
I do, yes. I'd like to ask what you would like to happen that would help you do better.
I would like
services.
Go ahead. Please finish your thought. I'm sorry, Wendy.
Go. You answer.
I would like globally for Essex County to be better understood across all segments of state government, that the investment for the last mile to get to people is more expensive than it is for people in more urban areas. And if that cost is more per person to get those last mile services out, then that's what it is. We are all Vermonters. Our preschoolers, our children, our elderly. We have the most per capita elderly population in the state. The hill I'm going to die on is that in general, it is difficult to fund and find people in these rural sparse areas and fund what is needed, especially without county government. But that is what I would like. That is what we need. We can't fundraise for, it is difficult to fundraise in the poorest area of the state for the basic services we need, with no hospital, no pharmacy. When the vaccine rollout came, sending 90-year-old people an hour each way is that would not be accepted in any part of Vermont. That would not be acceptable. To not have the health centers and the infrastructure. We have it just over the border in New Hampshire, just 5 miles away. But there are health services and education services that can't cross that river, to get over there. So does that answer your question? That's what I would like. Support that meets the need for the place.
Yeah.
And how did I get here, you ask? I was born here, just like everyone else who lives here. This is where we live, and this is our home for 5 and 6 generations.
Do we have questions from other members of the working group?
I was glad to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sometimes when somebody's really thorough, we end up with very few questions, but I do want to acknowledge you touched on something that seems to be true in general. And at first I was feeling a little bit badly for having squished together emergency preparedness and social services, but in a lot of cases, like you pointed out, they really overlap significantly. And so there's often a social service response to an emergency, and you highlighted that.
I just looked at my notes, and there's just one more point that I wanted to follow up on is that one, our advocacy from the library got vaccine clinics to our fire station and mobile vans. It was the library that brought the emergency services. I call that an emergency, type response. So now I get emails about from the Medical Reserve Corps and Building Bright Futures, and they've all got the library. And on 25 hours a week, I can't do it. I had somebody who wanted me to help me with their ballot with Prop 5, the ballots in November. I was like, I can't do that. You got to go to town hall. And because the propositions are not written on a literacy level for a lot of people. So I get the weirdest stuff. And the other point I wanted to make, I've forgotten.
I think it's also the case, though, Sharon. No, that's okay. Don't worry about that. I think it's also the case that you serve on a number of the school boards locally. And I'm thinking that that's in part because of your role at the library, although it's a personal reason that you serve on those committees. But it seems like you have quite a lot going on, and you've really, the great thing you've done in your is to really embed the library in all of the conversations locally. Even though it's an overwhelming thing, it's really admirable.
Our children are our biggest asset, for sure. There's no better place to emphasize that in a library. And I've been a school board member longer than a library director, so I'm well poised to forward and advance literacy initiatives, socialization, early intervention, and the places and conversations where kids need to be promoted, where they often are not recognized. Their primary care is not in Vermont. We have the play group. We've had a play group here for 30 years in coordination with the preschool with licensed educators to fill those gaps. So that's what we do in libraries. We fill gaps.
Well, I appreciate you and the hard work that you're doing, and I appreciate that you came today to share with us. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Please visit me in Canaan. Maple Weekend, April's
When
Maple.
is the Moose activity? I missed the Moose activity.
The Moose Festival is in August, and you're all invited. We have our book sale. We have Sugar on Snow in early August, and 2 weeks later, a festival for that. 2 weeks later is Moose Fest, and I'd love to have you. It's adjacent to the library.
Very exciting. Moose Fest. All right. Well, thank you so much, Sharon.
Thanks, everybody. Visit.
We're going to move into a conversation about emergency preparedness by the working group. And I think Tom McMurdo had some information that he could share with more specificity about the MEHC opportunities. So Tom, I want to call on you to share that.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I want to share a couple things that Rachel and Ben brought up earlier. First, I want to note, just to follow up on what you said, Kathy, Sharon, we hear similar stories from other rural librarians, and I'm so glad you could be here today and share that with us. Very compelling stuff. And also the way my brain works, I was thinking Sharon and Wendy, are these the two furthest apart libraries in the state? Maybe, but we can get back to that. So very quickly, let me do some screen sharing here. I just want to share a couple quick things with folks. So VACDARN got mentioned earlier, near and dear to my heart. So this is the VACDARN website. If you click through here where it says new resource mold, you get this brief checklist. And then right there is the link to Polygon. And I have the page up here for Polygon. And here's a number to write down: emergency 1-800-422-6379. So if you have materials in your library that you want to save that maybe can't be replaced, keep that number close. That's not your only option, but remember the state does have a contract with them, so that could potentially work out in the short term. I'm not exactly sure of their response time, but that is something to keep in mind. So again, through the VACDARN site, there's some great resources on there, but this may be the most important one in that moment of need. Speaking of moments of need, again, I always love to promote the MHEC purchasing contracts. You can think about anything that a large university would buy, everything from books to furniture to fuel. All of those are under contract under the MHEC. We have our page here, which has a handy quick start guide for those of you who are not members and are eligible. So if you're at a nonprofit in Vermont, you probably are eligible. So we have that quick start guide for you there. And here at the MHEC page, once you're a member, you can see the various contracts that they have. And if you click through G32, Emergency Response and Disaster Restoration Services, they have contracts that offer significant discounts. So as you click through there, you get to this page, which is the G32 contract. You can see the vendors that are on here. I believe I clicked through, yeah, so here are all of the services that are available through those vendors. You can see mold remediation, odor removal, smoke, soot damage. So there are multiple vendors on here, infectious disease suppression services, et cetera, et cetera. So you can think of all those emergency things that you might have to deal with. There are options here. Some of the MHEC vendors do not serve Vermont, so you'll want to look into that just to be sure. But you can see the discounts here as much as 50% off. So that could save you a lot of money. That might be one thing you call Polygon. Maybe, I don't know, maybe you look at one of these, get this set up ahead of time. There's a lot of options here. So yeah, okay, that's the same file. So again, MHEC, contracts, environmental safety, clicking through, you can see the suppliers here. So just very quickly wanted to bring that back home. And then, of course, VACDARN and Polygon. So those things are all available for you and in libraries of all kinds in Vermont.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate that quick update and overview of those services, those contracts that are available, and for your participation in VACDARN. I think you just went to a VACDARN meeting maybe last week. So it's great that we have a representative from the department in that important group, and you're doing really good work on that. So thank you. Okay, so I want to open up the conversation of the working group members on emergency preparedness. For those of you who are comfortable doing so, please turn your cameras on so it's not just me and the black screens for our group conversation on this topic. We'll talk again this afternoon about social services. The testimony we're hearing from 11:45 on is more focused on social services than on the emergency preparedness. But again, there's some bleed over. So folks can respond to some of what we've heard today, what was salient, what seems important, would be great. I might even call on you by name so that we get everybody participating. I know sometimes it's a little bit like, really? Come on, guys. Come on, folks. Here we go. We're gonna, if you raise your hand, it won't be like Russian roulette as far as if I'm gonna call on you next.
How about I kick off?
Oh, thank you, Wendy. I appreciate that.
Okay. What struck me most about this morning's information was about the sustainable libraries. The way that that by becoming more sustainable, they become a bigger part of the community, and the community appreciates them more. That was the thing that struck me the most. Other than that, having the one sheet page of wonder to get you anywhere you need to know in a disaster. Those were the two most striking things.
Thank you. Who else wants to jump in? Maybe Andy?
Well, I mean, the thing that surprised me the most was, the discussion of Canaan and the donut hole they fell into because they rely on New Hampshire for so many things. But in light of a federally managed problem that was delegated to the states, they were ineligible to access services that were right nearby. That was pretty tremendous and jarring for me, and I'm glad that I learned it because it would not have occurred to me otherwise. So I appreciate it coming up.
Yeah. I'm going to call on other people who are on camera. How about Karen?
I think school libraries are pretty blessed because we are not the only people in our buildings. So if we were to have some kind of emergency management or plumbing or whatever fire disaster, there are lots of other people in our buildings to help us sort of figure out what to do. Not all those people have the specific information necessary, like if we need to recover from a fire or water damage in terms of what to do with books versus what to do with other things. But I think this particular topic, school libraries are in a special place in that we're I can't think of any scenario in which we would be entirely on our own. There are other people right in our building who would help us too. So, and the social services piece is sort of ancillary to us often.
Karen, a question that I have for you, since you're in the school setting, it feels like schools are often mandated or forced into a spot because of some of the things that have happened nationally and locally. And you have done a lot of more comprehensive emergency planning in your school setting. And I'm wondering if you could pretend you're a public librarian or an academic librarian or a board member of a library, what resources do schools have that you think could be beneficial for us to develop in other library settings? Active shooter training might be one of them, right?
So that was exactly what I was going to say, is that I think that a lot of public libraries maybe have not done a lot of thinking about active shooter training, and that's something that schools do a lot of thinking about. So like multiple hours per year we spend on developing scenarios of what to do. It is a super hard topic to dig into, to sort of imagine how you would protect your staff and your patrons if something like that were to happen. The good news is it's not a terribly moving target. There are only a few ways that you can try to protect people. Like run, fight, hide. Those are your choices. And so it's a tough topic to tackle with staff, I think, but it's something that there are a lot of resources out there intended for the public school population. So that might be something, yeah, that's exactly what popped into mind, that school libraries would have resources on that public libraries maybe haven't planned for or done much planning for yet. Perhaps, though, you all have thought about that a lot already, which makes me extra sad. I'm sorry.
I want to call on Meg too. Thank you for thinking of that one. I think it's varied how much people have thought about active shooter training. Meg, you also have the school librarian hat that you wear, and could, I hope, answer that question too for us and think of some.
For sure, I'll echo what Karen says. I mean, in fact, we do monthly drills. We do a monthly, either it's a fire drill, or it's an active shooter drill, or it's a lockdown drill where we stay in place and hide. There's a number of different scenarios where that, would come into place, not necessarily active shooter, but sometimes medical emergencies. We need to protect students and protect people's privacy who are having a medical emergency. Just last evening at our school, we had, and so I don't know if public libraries do this, and because of COVID, we had not done it for 3 years, but we had representatives from the local law enforcement, police, fire department here, and emergency services to tour our building and give us their professional opinions on what our plans are. So I could easily see public libraries doing something like that, working with their local services to actually refresh plans, because these things change all the time. Like Karen was saying, you got 3 options in terms of like fight, flight, or hide, but like those aren't even like, every school has a different number of options to choose from. And schools are moving into a more active fight back, barricade doors sort of model, whereas, you know, some schools are still, including mine, still in a hide, lights out, lockdown sort of drill. And I know we're actively looking to change that. So I think those personnel in our town government, you know, in terms of police, fire, emergency, will have the most up to date and the expertise that could lend to the library.
One thing I'm realizing right now is I might be able to answer some. I feel like I came from a setting in public libraries where we had really extensive emergency planning as far as documents. And here at the state of Vermont, we have similar level, but maybe not quite as detailed. But in San Francisco Public Library, we had this binder thing, and there were all the different emergencies, and you could like flip to them and sort of grab the document as you went. And some of the things that were involved in that were really kind of basic ones, like doing fire drills annually. But some of it was responding to medical emergencies, knowing what to do if somebody has a seizure or somebody gets hurt, or, you know, whatever it might be. But I can try to get a copy of one of those plans for us. Sometimes there are facility aspects that we wouldn't be able, we'd have to redact, but I can try to get a copy of that for the working group. One thing that we do here in the state of Vermont, and that we also did in San Francisco, was to have an established place of refuge. If something happens to your building, where do you go? Because that's, and here in our building at 60 Washington Street, we just had to kind of rethink that a little bit. And having an outdoor short term and an indoor longer term seems important. But I think a recommendation of the working group really could be that we ask, that we recommend that libraries, individual libraries, develop emergency plans to address environmental and societal or medical or whatever other types of emergencies that we might have, because that's something that I think some of the smaller libraries particularly don't necessarily have the resources to do on their own. And so some template plans might be helpful to them. And then that those are refreshed regularly seems really important. I do have to say that there are times, I mean, the comments, I think Ben Rose was saying, you know, you make a plan and then the plan, as soon as you try to implement it, it doesn't work. But at the same time, it's good to go through the exercise of developing the plan and drilling on the plan, and to do that regularly so that you're kind of refreshing and seeing what was off with the plan. I think Christopher had their hand up, and then Karen will be after that.
Hey, thank you. So I guess, you know, none of what I heard today was too much of a surprise to me, maybe in part because I was really involved in the Irene response in my previous role. But I am thinking of the final audience for the working group and the legislators. And then hopefully, you know, broadly, the general public will read our report as well. And I am sure that much of what we heard today would be a surprise to many of them, right? That there definitely seems to be an impression out there, even by some people who know better, that libraries are simply rows of books that never get checked out or read. And that needs to be debunked. So when we're writing the final report, I think this is one of the more important sections to really get out there and make sure we're presenting on, so that we're making sure that people really understand how much more public libraries and school libraries are doing, in addition to providing a space for rows of books that do get read. So it's just a comment. I think we know this stuff, so it's not a surprise, but I think a lot of people don't.
Yeah, thank you, Christopher. Before we move to Karen, I think something I was going to share in the housekeeping topic, I think I should share with you now. Because last 2 weeks ago, suddenly I became aware that the Senate Committee on Education wanted to change the scope of the working group. And that specifically they wanted to add language about firearm violence and if libraries were prepared for firearm violence. Public libraries were prepared, just libraries in general, all the libraries were prepared for firearm violence. So I quickly reached out to Chair Campion, Senator Campion, who's the chair of Senate Education, and I spoke with him and then went in for testimony and recommended that instead of focusing so narrowly on firearm violence, that we change the scope to include specifically public safety. It's already part of emergency planning, but calling it out more specifically and giving the community an opportunity to talk about that, because that is something I think that is really, we can talk about emergency planning. I think for me and for maybe it's just me, but I thought we would be talking about like floods, kind of to Rachel Onuf's point. Like we would be talking about floods and we would be talking about earthquakes and we would be talking about something about the facility. But public safety and staff safety in libraries is a kind of different topic. And it seems that if we asked for comment on it, we would get a totally different type of comment than we got from the community. So there is a bill, Senate Bill 133, an act relating to miscellaneous changes to education law. That's got the working group charge in it. And at this point, it has not been passed yet, but the Senate Committee on Education has updated the proposed language to read whether current law provides adequate public safety protections in libraries, and that our report would include recommendations for legislative action regarding public safety protections on library property. So it's very possible that as it goes through the legislative process, will become a changed scope, an addition to the scope of our work. So when we get to housekeeping, I'll mention that, but I do want to say people are beginning to think about this at the legislative level, which is important. And I supported the addition of a broader, not just firearm safety, but the broader topic, because we want to be able to include all types of things that happen that we regularly see in libraries in our state of all types, school libraries, public libraries, academic, special libraries. Karen, did you have I'm not sure if Meg has a response to that. I might want to grab that before we go to your comment, if it's okay with you.
Okay, just quickly, I'm curious, Kathy, if that would include sort of techniques like de-escalation staff, trained staff. I automatically, my mind went to like a drag queen story time scenario, for example, where we've seen in other states that like a de-escalation and added security might be needed for a library, and if there could be a protocol or a resource for local libraries to go to and to be preventative. Just a thought. That's where my mind went to.
I think it could, because it's talking about, they're sometimes focused on, is there an additional protection needed? But it could also be that we make recommendations in that general field, so that if we're considering the topic of safety, and then we want to answer those specific questions particularly. One thing that I had noticed in the past is that there was a harassment of staff in public buildings bill that went through last year, and that there's kind of a hole in it. So if you are a librarian working in a municipal public library, because the municipal buildings, including libraries, are covered, you're good. But if you're in that legislation doesn't seem to cover the staff of incorporated libraries if they were harassed, because their buildings not included. So something like that, recommending language to a specific existing bill, could be included, but also best practices and suggestions in the realm of public safety could be included. Karen?
So I just had two things that Meg's comments made me think of. So we are served entirely by volunteer fire departments here. And so we also have our, as Meg said, the fire departments come to do a tour 2 times a year for our building, because it's good for them. If they don't have kiddos at our school, they may have not ever been in it before. And our building layout, because of like additions over the years, is confusing. And so having them have the opportunity to walk through the building and understand like how the building works in a non-emergency situation is really helpful for those folks. The chiefs of all those departments have blueprints and stuff, but just having experience of the building. And then they also do give us tips. Like they said, our room numbers should be on the bottom of the doors, so that if it is a fire and they're moving low to the ground, they can figure out which room number they're looking at. Ours are all on the tops of the doors. So that's an example. And then also the Agency of Education in their weekly field memo does something called a What If Wednesday. And it's a little emergency response scenario that's designed as like a table talk session for administrative staff in school districts. And so they just present a different scenario every week. And staff with emergency response responsibilities can talk about what would we do in this scenario. So that might be, I don't know if the AOE is willing to share. I mean, they're publicly available on the AOE webpage, so I think they're probably okay to share. But it might be a good thing for public librarians who are trying to imagine all these different scenarios. Someone at the AOE is already imagining all those, so that might be helpful.
Yeah, if I can, I think, Karen, if you could share that link to the resource with us, that would be helpful. Usually if it's available online, I just kind of fold it in. We've been folding in the resource as part of the comments. So if you could share it, I mean, part of the minutes, if you could share the resource with me and Gina Rubin, or just me if you don't know Gina's email. I do want to say I've run into this issue before where we think things from schools can be ported over. And the libraries, the public library and the academic library facilities are so incredibly different from a school facility. And there's been a move in public libraries toward making every space a public space, really reducing the staff workrooms. And it's really tough. I had a shelter in place situation at the Ortega Branch Library in San Francisco while I was chief of branches. It's like I was about to leave and I picked up the phone as it rang at like 6 o'clock at night. And there was a neighborhood active shooting going on. Like there was a domestic violence kind of situation and there was a gun and everybody was being told, go to the library, which was also supposed to close at 6 o'clock. And this building was like a fishbowl. And so everybody ran into the library and then the staff called and it was like, my first question was something like, are you under a desk? And she's like, no, I'm just standing here at the window. And I was like, get everybody into the staff room. And they're like, can we really go? The public can go in the staff room? I was like, yeah, the public can go in the staff room. There's a gun. Like your building only has like a few areas with no windows. Get everybody into those areas. And then just keeping the public there when all you have are like a couple granola bars and they're getting hungry and like people wanted to leave. And how do you let them leave? It was crazy. And it wasn't like a drill. This was like a real thing, but we would have never thought to drill it. And so when you think about the difference in the facility versus we're in a classroom and we can all go in like this area and the door closes and the doors have been redesigned and like there's no door. A lot of these workrooms, you just flow into them. There's no door to barricade. So it's a little bit, I do think that we need to think about that in public libraries. And you also don't want to be building this. The best service that you're providing on a normal day isn't the safe room you need on the maybe day, one day. It's really, really challenging. So it's just something for us to think about in this area is like, sometimes we want to just port over the school policy, but it doesn't quite fit this layout. You know, maybe a mall is a better model. Like maybe maybe a public space is an auditorium is a better model to port over the policy. But definitely, I think we should look at the school ones and And even thinking about the school library, how do you hide the kids in the school library, which doesn't have maybe a door? I know mine didn't growing up. So it's just something to think about. I think I feel like I saw Jeanette's hand up, but I'm not sure if it's still up. And then Meg.
Just a couple things have come to mind. You know, if anything is any more controversial than a drag queen story time, it's telling who can and cannot open carry or concealed carry or whatever their firearms through the door of a library. I think getting involved in any sort of document that tries to disarm people at the door, whoever they are. I mean, this doesn't sound like me at all, but I mean, legally it's touching with fire on what you, when and if you can or cannot tell people they can't have their toy gun or their real gun in this case. A comment on the disaster mitigation starts with architectural plans, and a lot of libraries are looking at architectural plans right now. I know, you know, architects may want to put hot water heating systems on a second floor. That if when you're closed and the heat goes out and the pipes freeze and burst, drenches your library. You know, there's a lot of points of intervention. So just a couple things that have, you know, popped into my mind listening this morning. Oh, and the other thing is, in talking about heating centers and cooling centers, I would be curious how many of these do have backup generators, because that I would think would be one of your areas of highest need, is when there are power outages in order to continue with those services. It's something I know we've talked about at the library, but have never had the money to invest in, whether it's a power wall or a gas generator or anything along those lines. Thank you.
Thank you. We have just a minute. I want to share a couple things as possible recommendations that sort of popped into mind for me, and we can pick this up again later this afternoon maybe. But the first, I mentioned earlier that the recommendation that individual libraries develop emergency plans to address environmental and societal emergencies for their institutions. Put in periodic revision and the visits from the local first responders. When Ben Rose was talking, that we should recommend that for statewide plans such as the hazard mitigation plan, that libraries be considered, because we're public community centers, public buildings and community centers. Recommendation for both incorporated and municipal libraries to be included in each municipality's emergency plan. Jeanette, maybe you can put in a chat thread a recommendation related to the facilities planning that you just mentioned. That would be helpful. I could capture it in this little document. And then also including public libraries in planning for local cooling and warming centers and shelters. From personal experience, I think staff need training to provide that service, because it's not just, you know, you've got a heat wave and you open the door. Like if you see a person who comes in and they're having heat stroke, you don't just put them in the community room. You have to know what to do with them and know what it means to set up the shelter. And sometimes I've been in situations where the city just says, open the buildings. You don't need to know anything. And it was like, we don't even have water. Like, what are you talking about? And then also develop staffing plans to facilitate expanded hours, because if your library is only open 10 hours a week and the heat wave doesn't coincide with those 10 hours, good luck to you. And if the library staff need to go home to their families, like, how do you maintain round the clock cooling? You might need help for staffing the space with people from other departments and community volunteers. Those were just some that came to mind for me. If those sound okay to folks, I've got a running list over here that I can get into our recommendations. Okay. we should keep moving. We can pick this up again this afternoon in the other conversation. We're so packed to the gills with great people here to share with us. I want to welcome Wendy Hisco, who I think has been here for a while, who's here from Brownell Library in Essex.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can, yeah.
Okay, great. All right, I'm not on a foreign computer, so I want to make sure. Yes, I wanted to share our social services, and I feel like for us, our emergency services are often more social services. We've had, toilet floods and that sort of thing, and that's usually far more straightforward to handle than the different types of people that come to our library. I think the pandemic has really brought to light to me how much there's a lot of transient people in our area, and they all come to the library to look for help. This is the place they know they can come, and we'll take the time to try to connect them with resources. We are right near a train station and a bus station, and that has been interesting, especially during this pandemic, because we learned that the train station will only take credit cards. So we've had people that were dropped off at the train station that come to the library that don't have a cell phone, they don't have a credit card, and have expected us to help. And then the bus station, I think, will change as buses are they're going to start charging again soon, and that may change some of the types of people we see and the help that they need. We're really fortunate in Essex Junction to be part of our police department has really been a partner with us for ever since I've been here. They are very much focused on community policing and have they've always worked on de-escalation and trying to kind of meet people where they are. So it hasn't really been like they definitely have their ability to enforce, but when we've had to call them, I've just seen them really start at the beginning with people to try to understand what's going on. And I was in touch with our police chiefs on a regular basis because of situations at Brownell. And in 2018, the wonderful news that they were starting a pilot outreach worker program, and Essex Police was going to be one of the places that the outreach workers were embedded. And at the time, I think 4 communities had signed in, and it was modeled off of the street team in Burlington, but it would be, I think they started with a team of 4, and now they have 5 or 6 people. They've been consistently staffed for a while. During the pandemic, they really had a lot of turnover. So we were kind of back in the same boat of trying to sort out things, because we had people when we were closed, but still offering sort of curbside service. We had people living in our parking lot, in our bushes. There was a lot of drug paraphernalia around the library. So we had the police were helpful in trying to navigate that. And really, they do understand they don't like no trespassing people from the library, because they know that a lot of people really do need the resources. So it turns into, if they really are breaking laws, that will happen. But otherwise, if they're being a nuisance, they might just move them along. Or in the outreach team, we can call. They're not available all the time, but now they're open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., which on the weekdays. So when we're open on Saturdays, we don't have that access. But it's been really great to have them, because they come in, they're in plain clothes, and they'll spend as much time as they can. If they're available, their priority is to do ride-alongs with the police to respond to issues. So sometimes it might take them hours to get to our library, but other times they show up within 10 minutes. So we've really been fortunate to have that resource in our community. But we also have to do a lot of training with our staff, because sometimes it's just a de-escalation situation, or knowing what resources are available, what can we do to help people, make them feel heard, kind of strengthen any sort of trust with them. So we do close quarterly for training. It always starts with a safety walk. So we walk through the building is closed, walk through the whole building with all staff and review where the fire extinguishers are, where the panic buttons are, where the emergency exits are, where we would hide if we needed to hide if there was a crisis situation. where where do we meet if we have to run outside? Do we take people out with us, or if they refuse to go, what do we do? So those are things that we try to review regularly with all of our staff. And so our training is always ongoing, and we can never be sure what's going to happen, because even with all of the training that we do, you just never know that it's never going to cover the situation that you're handling at the exact moment. So we have done training with, it's not always mental health or social services training, but we do, sometimes we actually get to plan summer reading, that sort of thing, for these quarterly trainings. But we've worked with Howard Center, Spectrum, NAMI, our local community justice center has been great about doing circle training. So we can, that's helped a lot with kids when we have a problem, a group of kids, that everybody can go in a circle and kind of say what happened, what their response is, and really feel like they're all heard. Our local police department has a certified trainer in de-escalation, and he's also the school liaison officer, so he really understands some of the population that we are work with. We subscribe to Ryan Dowd's homelessness training, which offers monthly webinars and a lot of other resources that he runs a wet homeless shelter in Illinois, the second largest shelter in Illinois. And so that's been really helpful, because he seems to really hit the mark on how to make people feel like they mean something, but also how to handle a situation when it does get escalated. And we've done one run, hide, fight training with Bill McSally. We have another one scheduled for May, and he's a retired FBI SWAT team member that lives in Vermont, and his wife is a circulation librarian in Chittenden County. So he really understands the populations that we need and how people can get upset when you can't deliver what they're looking for. Our staff also, we've had a lot of discussions over the years. Things have changed a lot, and so we I think it was we tried to be a friendly community library, but we also are very concerned now with privacy and what people might be calling. It used to be that somebody might call and be like, oh, is Bobby there? Can you look for him? And we'd go look for Bobby, but now we're like, oh, you can come in and look for them, because we don't know what they're calling for, and if they're trying to find out sort of stalking situation. We've had patrons stalked, we've had staff stalked, so it's those are all things that we are wary of and don't want to make worse. So we are, and then also during the pandemic, we've really, now that we're kind of coming, I wouldn't say out of it, but kind of just landing in our new normal, we've had a great, the community organizations that we always struggled to connect with, and the schools were really kind of just doing their own thing and really busy, and we wanted to connect with them locally and just try to work with them on things, because we do serve the same people. They've been more available there now. I think there's more interest in kind of coming together to kind of serve the different types of communities, like the refugees that we have settling into our community, and then like children who might be homeless, or parents who are struggling and trying to break the cycle that we see. If you're a lot of times parents, if they aren't raised in a good situation, they're not going to have the tools to help their kids when they're in rough situations. So it's so the training, I feel like a lot of what we do, we offer lots of resources, and a lot of the regular community members are coming here, but they're generally not the ones that stick around the library throughout the day, unless they're a telecommuter. So it's really the people that are coming and looking for a safe place. We stress being welcoming. That's the top behavior guideline we have, is being a welcoming and safe space for all. And that's sort of, we've had different, lots of discrimination issues, arguments, bullying. And so those are all things that if we can deal with it on our own, and it always does require 2 staff when it gets escalated. So I do worry about a lot of the sole librarians out there, and we are in the center of what is now a city. And the fire station is right here. We have other resources that are right nearby, but I know like in my own town, our library closes at 6 because that's when the store closes across the streets. And so that's their backup. And so there's the layout of Vermont libraries is very unique with how many rural locations we have. And we're really fortunate in Essex Junction to have a police department for one thing, and then also to have our police really want to kind of work with the community to kind of keep things as stable as possible.
Thank you, Wendy. I want to take a few minutes to open it up to the working group members to ask questions or follow up on things that you have spoken to today. I do think your points about the solo librarians and the challenges there and the differences are important. I'm not sure if you were here when we were talking about this, but I think we are likely to add a meeting that's specific to the topic of safety and public safety in libraries, and probably roll staff safety into that as well. But there are different dynamics with larger or smaller staffing cohorts. Yes. And as you pointed out, that you are lucky that you have local police. Many towns don't have that in Vermont. Right. But focusing on the topic of the social services, which I know can dovetail significantly, working group members, are there questions that you have for Wendy or comments on what she shared that you wanted to make? Andy.
Hi, Wendy.
Hi, Andy.
Full disclosure, I'm on the board of the Brownell. One question I have for you from the social service side, which is one of the things that I've encountered directly, of course, is young people coming into the library unattended after school, and the library basically serving as a kind of de facto after school care. Yes. And that's ebbed and flowed. And you talked a little bit at the last board meeting about how things have changed since the pandemic. And I'm wondering if you could just elaborate a little bit about that for the working group.
Yeah, we're finding kids right now are really lacking social skills. They're not used to being in public spaces. They don't understand that you can't, like, we're not a gym. The kids don't run around. You can't yell. So there's been, so that's definitely, even with like the most wonderful kids in the world, they're still really catching up on a lot of the skills that they may have gotten in the past few years, where they've just been stuck in their, like, if they're lucky, potted in their classrooms and not really out interacting with the world. So that's been a struggle for our staff. It takes a lot of time to sort of just talk to them and repeatedly talk to them about how you can behave in a library. And maybe you need to go outside if you want to run around, or there's been bullying incidents, and so kids are just we regularly say we're not in loco parentis, but that doesn't mean we don't care when we see kids having negative interactions, and we do want it to be a safe space, and that it's just been the reopening has been hard for it's been great to have the kids back for sure, after, especially for our youth staff who really thrive on the child interactions, but it also has taken a ton of time for them, and I think some of them are getting better, and we've always been a place, it seems like there's a group of kids that are kind of the wayward kids that don't have families that they can go home to in a safe place, and maybe they're just locked out of their houses until somebody shows up, and so they've kind of glommed onto each other, and then it's like some of them may move on and get jobs or move out of the community, but there's always been a core, and that core is starting to form back again. It wasn't there for a couple of years, so we have like the wonderful library kids that are going to go to the programs and read books in the corner, and then we just kind of have this group that just wants a dry place, a warm, dry place, and trying to keep them from being not disrupting others. But the training kids to have social skills and being in a shared space has been definitely a challenge for us, that is ongoing, and maybe it may take a few years with kids being back more in circulation for them to understand what it's like to be in a place that's they don't have direct supervision, but they still need to follow some rules.
Well, thank you so much, Wendy, for being with us today. really appreciate that you took the time to share and the perspective that you've added to the conversation. May be good to have you back for a subsequent meeting on some of the public safety matters. I want to now go into our 1 hour break. We have an abbreviated break today, working group members. Sometimes I wonder what to do with the additional 30 minutes. Well, don't need to worry about that today. We don't have a 90-minute lunch. We just have a 1 hour lunch. So please plan to be back at 1 o'clock. I appreciate all of your efforts today. This is a longer meeting than usual, but it's we've got 2 really heavy hitting topics. So thank you all. Rest up, get some water, use the restroom. I'll see you at 1 o'clock. Eat something healthy. Go for a walk.
Bye. Thanks.
Thanks, Wendy.
Yep. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you.